this. Okay, we're officially up and rolling.
All right, let's roll.
We're just gonna listen. We're gonna listen to a little bit of this, but I think also maybe do some reading.
The path to victory for Hamas is over. Shut down, closed. As an analyst, I should just be dispassionate. But as somebody who had committed to a Hamas victory, it becomes an emotional moment. And so you lash out at, who to blame. The path to victory for Hamas is over. Shut down, closed. As an analyst, I should just be dispassionate about that. But as somebody who had committed to a Hamas victory, it becomes an emotional moment. And so you lash out at, who to blame. And because nobody predicted the fall of Assad, you can't say, well, it's their fault, their fault, their fault. But you turn to the people who are cheering this outcome. And I look at them and I say, who the hell are you to cheer this outcome? Do you understand what you're doing to the cause of the Palestinian people? Do you understand that the sacrifices that the Palestinian people have made since October 7, 2023 have been nullified by this? And you're cheering? You're cheering? And I'm furious. I'm still furious at them. If you're cheering this outcome, you've betrayed the Palestinian people. That's my heartfelt assessment. If you cheer the downfall of Assad, heartfelt assessment. If you cheer the downfall, heartfelt assessment. And that the sacrifices that the Palestinian people have made since October 7, 2023 have been nullified by this, and you're cheering? You're cheering? And I'm furious. I'm still furious at them. If you're cheering this outcome, you've betrayed the Palestinian people.
Did he call him Adam? His name's not Adam, it's Ahmad.
That's my heartfelt assessment. If you cheer the downfall of
Maybe he said
Assad,
Ammon.
I don't care what
Ammon.
your justification
I
is.
don't know.
And we had a conversation last night, and there's much justification for that on certain elements. But if you're doing that, you've turned your back on the Palestinian people, and you will never convince me otherwise. You will never convince me otherwise, because it is over now. Hamas cannot win. There is not a path to victory. And those people who said, well, you can't predict the outcome, even last night in our discussion, people said the Palestinian cause has been set back 3 or 4 generations was one of the things put out there. 3 or 4 generations. That means that Hind Rajab didn't have to die, did she? Shouldn't have died. If you're willing to set back the cause of Palestinian statehood 3 or 4 generations, then why did she die? Why did tens of thousands of other women and children die? Why? Why? If you weren't going to support this 100%, you shouldn't have crossed the line of departure. That's the operator in me. If you aren't going to commit to the victory, if you're not going to go 100% full time, all the time, then don't start it. And then I have to take a step back and say, who am I to be more Palestinian than the Palestinians? I'm not a Palestinian. I'm a guy who bought into this cause. I believe sincerely that there needs to be a free and independent Palestine, but it's gone. It isn't going to recover from this. No one can convince me otherwise. It is a death knell for Hamas. And you see, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, came out today and said, it's over, Hamas. You might as well pick a ceasefire right now because it's done. And it is done. The United States is now negotiating with Iran. Going to pull Iran. The Ansarallah is going to be isolated. Those brave Yemenis who stood up out of nowhere, stood up and took on the United States Navy and beat them and strangled Israel nearly to death. They're going to be isolated. And Hezbollah is finished. The way this is probably going to end for Hezbollah is that their militia is going to be converted, turned over to the Lebanese army, restructured, and fall in. They'll maintain some sort of military structure, but it'll come under the command of the Lebanese armed forces. And the political party will become one of several political parties of the Lebanese government.
So there's a lot to unpack here. I understand where you're coming from. And I'll say actually for me as well, I was also hoping, and I guess to some extent you could say I was committed to believing that this strategy post-October 7th by Hezbollah and Hamas would lead to a political defeat and would achieve the things that you're describing. But I think as soon as Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire, I realized it was not going to happen. And I think regardless of whether Assad fell in Syria or not, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I think the axis of resistance, while they were able to accomplish a lot in the last year, applying economic pressure through the Red Sea, Hezbollah firing on the northern territories, forcing these settlers to move down into the south, they put a tremendous amount of pressure on Israeli society, but it just wasn't the same as the pressure the Israelis were putting on both Lebanon and in Gaza. I mean, they were dropping, 2,000-pound bombs on apartment buildings on the regular. There was just no way, I think, that the Israelis were going to back down. I think they legitimately treated October 7th as an existential threat, and they acted accordingly. And they whipped out, every tool and resource they had, from the media space to the military. I mean, using everything in their arsenal except for a nuclear weapon to achieve victory. And I think, so while the axis of resistance accomplished a lot, I think it was a tall order. And we talked yesterday, I was sharing with you that I don't believe October 7th was a plan that the axis of resistance as a whole collectively agreed on and came up with and then executed. Hamas carried this out, from what I understand. I haven't seen anything proving otherwise, but Hamas carried this out almost in an act of desperation, that they felt there was no other option. Normalization was about to take place. And so they decided to do this without informing Iran, without informing Hezbollah, without getting their consent. And they put them in a position where they had to essentially make good on their rhetoric, because their rhetoric was the axis of resistance exists, if not primarily, partially, to resist the state of Israel and hopefully free Palestine. So they were put in a position, and I believe they're authentic in doing so. I think when Hezbollah decided to stand in solidarity with Hamas, they did so out of an authentic desire to do so. I don't think it was performative or fake, but I think they had no other choice. And for a long time, Hassan Nasrallah in the beginning had Hezbollah engage in the war but not escalate it. They were not targeting civilians. They were mainly focusing on these border installations like radars and cameras, and it was effective and it was harassing the Israelis. But I think the threat that the Israelis were really worried about wasn't, these cheap rockets that they're firing, which we know the majority of them are 1980s or 1990s cheap rockets produced that are unguided, that come from Iran. That is dangerous, of course, but the Israelis, that's not what they were really worried about, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that what they were concerned about is they couldn't tell if Hezbollah was actually informed of October 7th or not, and if they were they also planning a cross-border raid? And I think that's why they were so insistent on pushing these settlers further south, because they did not want to give Hezbollah an opportunity to cross the border and capture more soldiers and civilians as well. And I think that's probably what they were afraid of. Once they assessed that, okay, these guys, this was not a plan, they don't know what they're doing, they're adapting on the fly, and Iran is not really interested in escalating with us, so we can take over, we can take the initiative, and we can go on the offensive. And all of that is to say that I think, as hopeful as I was that the Axis could achieve what you're describing, I don't think it was an actual possibility. And we'll talk more about this when we discuss Hillary Clinton and the WikiLeaks cable and how she described Iran's strategy with the proxies and a nuclear weapon. We'll discuss that in further detail later on, but that's how I feel about it. And so while I was disappointed to, I guess, get confirmation that this strategy was not going to work, I personally felt relief that at least, Bashar al-Assad fell in Syria, because I have many Syrian friends who are close to me who are anti-Assad, who for years, even prior to the revolution in 2011, informed me of their perspective, and it was something that I could relate to, being from Iraq. I knew what Saddam Hussein did to my own family members, and I know what Bashar al-Assad did to the people of Syria, and many other authoritarian dictators in the region did the same as well. And so obviously, I don't want to see Syria as a whole weakened. You know, I think Bashar al-Assad, as the leader, had the obligation to at least respond to the uprising and the revolution in a way that made room for some expression, political expression, legitimate frustrations, and try to, you know, cede power at some point in time in a way that satisfied the majority of the people who clearly were against them, as we've seen, right? But he didn't do so. And I think to hang on for an extra decade, he ultimately destroyed all of Syria. And I think this just confirms the perspective or the interpretation that many people had of him who were against him, that this guy's a selfish, corrupt dictator who's not really interested in the interests of the Syrian people. He's interested in his own well-being and the well-being of his regime. So it is a setback for the Axis, but I think on the one hand, I'm relieved for my Syrian brothers and sisters who are grateful that Assad is finally gone. And at the same time, I am disappointed that, you know, the Axis fell short and that their position is now threatened because they no longer will have access to Syria. But I don't believe that that was necessarily the most effective method to achieve independence for Palestine. And I definitely don't think it's the only one. Time will tell.
Let me push back a little bit
Go ahead.
on this. I think, first of all, we have to understand that nobody supports the creation of a Palestinian state outside of some Palestinians, not all, some, and the Axis of Resistance. Outside of that, nobody supports the creation of a Palestinian state. That's a statement of fact. You can't contradict it. And the reason why I say some Palestinians is I take a look at the Palestinian cause, and outside of Hamas and a few other offshoots, you take a look at the Fatah and you take a look at the Palestinian Authority. They are de facto agents of the Israeli government who are paid to suppress Palestinian statehood aspirations. Straight up statement of fact. Cannot be disproved. The Israelis pay Palestinians.
That's true, but I don't think you can lay the blame at Palestinians, even the one that defected and became Israeli collaborators. I think it's still the fault of Israel for engineering a society that people feel the need like they have to betray their own people. I mean, we're talking about the worst humanitarian crisis on earth, and I don't think we can incriminate the Palestinians themselves for doing whatever they have to do. At least from an outsider perspective, I mean, if you were Palestinian, I could understand if you had some sort of critique, as Rashid Khalidi does in his 100 Years War on Palestine book, and as he's stated in many interviews. But, you know, I still think of it from the vantage point of U.S. imperialism versus indigenous nationalism.
To suppress Palestinians. They pay Palestinians to kill Palestinians. And they do this all the while Israel is engaged in a policy of eliminating any potential infrastructure that could be used to create a Palestinian state. The Abraham Accords was a disaster for the Palestinian cause. It greenlighted Israel's continued acquisition of Palestinian lands in the West Bank. And so if you're somebody who believes in the creation of a Palestinian state, to be honest, prior to October 7th, 2023, my position was, if the Palestinians aren't willing to fight for it, why should I care about it? It doesn't matter how justified they are. It doesn't matter what history. It doesn't matter about the Nakba. It doesn't matter about any of it.
I don't know about all that, you know? I mean, it should be, I feel like we could flip it back on Scott Ritter right there for a moment and be like, if you're not willing to fight against the U.S. government, which is causing the destruction of Palestine, then, you know, how are other people supposed to care? Yeah, but what kind of fight, what do you expect these people to do? I mean, they are afforded, you know, every excuse in the book, in my opinion. Yeah, they're surrounded and checked every mile. They're checkmated. They're under an illegal blockade. I mean, the list goes on and on. We know the historical record here, but he's saying, oh, prove it to me, Palestine. It's like, no. The U.S. government needs to be dismantled for its actions in the Middle East. And if anything, it's on us. It's not on the Palestinians.
Aren't willing to fight for it. then why should I care? Why should I care about this? This is how when people say we're going to Gaza, we're going on a flotilla to Gaza. I say, why? Why are you caring so much about something that it seems the majority of Palestinians don't?
Well, again, you can't say that. I mean, you're making a speculative value judgment on the Palestinian people. It's like a psychological assessment or something. You have no idea what these people's social. I mean, you claim to do that. You do. I'm surprised to hear you sort of hold the Palestinians in contempt. You know, but they're fighting against their own annihilation, and oh my God, so what if they have given themselves to apathy or doomerism? I mean, what you need to see, you know, their whole families have been, their whole bloodlines have been annihilated. You need to see more blood and suffering and more anger out of the Palestinians for you to take up their cause and fight for their cause, just because it's, you know, it's not enough that it's just the right thing to do.
Palestinians have been fighting for Palestine for decades. I mean,
Then why did they surrender?
When?
Why did the Palestinian Authority take CIA money, take Israeli money, and surrender
the
to
Palestinian Authority is, you know, a collective of a
Damn, I'm really shocked by Scott Ritter right now.
small minority.
Even though I ultimately agree with the assessment geopolitically, not internally to Syrians, or I'm saying a broad stroke here, that the fall of Assad is, you know, like I said before, it's a win for the advancement of U.S. imperialism, and it's a win for Israel. But I don't like how I think he's bitter, and he's placing his blame on the victims. The people, like, you're shaming the victims for their behavior, and it's like, who knows, you know, who knows what the Israeli state has on these Palestinian subcontractors. I mean, they're being held at gunpoint. I mean, what do you expect? These people, you know, they're going to start thinking about their immediate families, you know, and protecting them over, you know, this idea of national sovereignty. It's self-preservation. I don't see why Ritter is so hell-bent on blaming these people.
Individuals who, you know, are essentially...
And it had nothing to do... It's not like the Palestinians... you know, I think he's sore about the fall of Assad, but then he's going to blame the Palestinians for, you know, some of them being subcontractors for the Israeli state. I mean, let's be real. What you're mad about is that the you know, Assad regime has fallen.
You know,
it's what happened
the elite,
in Syria.
And just like the elite of any other country will sell out the majority, you know, so that they benefit the most. I mean, Palestinians themselves do not appreciate or like the Palestinian Authority.
Then why'd they overthrow them?
Well,
where's that revolution? If you're going to sit here and tell me you can fucking overthrow
Jesus.
Bashar al-Assad, you better
Oh, Jesus, this is gross.
damn throw over.
What the fuck? What is he, this guy is the whitest Palestinian. Oh no, say it ain't so, Scott, just go back to just being a dispassionate UN weapons inspector, please. Let's save all the fireworks.
Boss.
Yeah.
All right?
Well,
don't sit here and tell me it's so wonderful to get rid of Assad, but for the Palestinians, you can't get rid of a boss. You're going to let that son of a bitch sit there since 2005, not have an election, oppress you, sell you out to the Israelis, and allow the United States and Israel to take you down a path
Bro is so emotional. He didn't have his coffee this morning.
every avenue for Palestinian statehood be shut. You do know that if Israel had normalized relations with Saudi Arabia and
Did you see Ahmad? He was like, anyway, my next question, what is that going to be? he's like, man, let me go ahead and wait for this all to be over with.
in October or November of 2023, as they were preparing to do. That was it.
I know, he does kind of seem like a complete cokehead right now. He's like, why did I invite this guy? Well, I mean, I think Scott Ritter gives really great geopolitical analysis. I mean, he's very well read. He's dialed in to what's going on. But I think when it comes to his moral compass, or, you know, it's a little lacking. I think it's he's choosing to get fired up about, and you know, what is his anger in the service of? It's anger towards Palestinians. I don't know. Has this man lost any children to Israeli snipers?
Set match. There would never be a Palestinian state because it was all over. That's why Hamas did what it did. Hamas did what it did because nobody else in the Palestinian side was fighting for him. That's a statement of fact. And I'm tired of hearing about
I mean, that's
saying,
true. I mean, you know, Hamas, for the reason that Hamas was elected is because they were telling the truth. At least, at the very least, you could say to the Palestinians that Hamas was honest with what their platform was. And, you know, going back to the Second Intifada, and even before then, the 90s all the way leading up to the Second Intifada, the Palestinians were, you know, and I know I'm another white dude speaking on behalf of the Palestinians, but this is from Palestinian sources themselves, and you know, they were growing disenchanted, frustrated by what Scott Ritter is bringing up, which is that the PLO, the PA, the Fatah movement was all bought and sold by Israel. It was, you know, the Oslo Accords installed these, you know, Israeli collaborators in government, and you know, nothing materially changed for the Palestinians. They didn't have their right to self-determine. They didn't have their right to, you know, their land resources and labor. So, not, you know, the Oslo Accords didn't change anything, and so they started peacefully protesting, and then, you know, Hamas comes along and actually participates in the election, and they're, you know, once again, like, proposing militant opposition to Israel, and you know, that's what made Hamas relevant. But even so, I would still say that Israel is the aggressor. I mean, let's not get lost in the weeds here. It's Israel, it's the United States. We're not going to blame the secondary contradiction. It's almost like, yeah, I mean, maybe Scott Ritter needs to read Karl Marx, you know, or Chairman Mao, because he's getting lost in the sauce, and he's blaming the secondary subordinate aspect in this contradiction. With you know, he's blaming, you know, when he should be blaming the principal aspect, which is Israel, which is imperialism, which is the United States, which is the actual aggressors, which are the actual aggressors.
there's elites this, elites that. You can't sit here and talk about getting rid of Bashar al-Assad.
Exactly. Thank you, Name It, Maine. I know. We always love to just find another analogy in the historical record, and it's like saying, why didn't the Jews take down Hitler, right? Why didn't, you know, I need to see it from those in the Warsaw Ghetto that they really want it. Why can't we see in Auschwitz that these people want it? Well, they're being starved to death. You know, it's just, it's weird. It's kind of, I think Bro has got a screw loose. He probably just hasn't been taking his medication, or maybe he's overly medicated. I don't know.
And tolerate
I'm
about
just surprised, okay?
corrupt rule since 2005. That's my perspective as an outsider, and I'm sorry. I just don't buy into any apologies about, or people trying to apologize. Well, we couldn't do it because of this, because of that, because of this. Bullshit. A bullet through the head solves every problem. Every problem.
Jesus.
Why didn't you do it? Why didn't the Palestinian people rise up and get rid of the man who sold you out to the Israelis?
These things take time, Scott.
You don't have time. You ran out of time. The calendar ended.
The Palestinians have been running out of time, they've been told, since 1948. For the reason why many Palestinians are supportive of the fall of Bashar al-Assad is because they've learned to be patient. And I'm not saying that they should continue to live under the conditions they do so, but if you listen to, I don't know the exact numbers, but if you see the expressions of solidarity from many Palestinians, even the ones in Gaza suffering a genocide, and no one on earth is in more of a hurry to end the current state of oppression than the people suffering a genocide in Gaza.
Thank you. And he's locking eyes with Ritter. I have to say I'm impressed with Ahmad's cool, calm demeanor, and his hasn't lost. He's obviously, his body has rejected Scott Ritter's rhetoric here and his impassioned plea here, and his anger, but he's responding in calm, and yeah, nice work.
They themselves are congratulating the Syrian people for saying, congratulating them for the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and they're congratulating the people of Lebanon, saying, even though you promised us a ceasefire, we're glad that you got it because we don't want you to go through what we're going through.
But let me push
they
back
understand
for a second.
it's a lot more complex and complicated. And when it comes to the Palestinian Authority, there have been moments of protest and resistance. They get violently shut down. No one is happy about Mahmoud Abbas. People hate him. They hate the Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinians, for decades, have tried armed resistance, then they've tried negotiate.
I mean, that's another thing is like, Scott Ritter, you should be talking about Americans. Like, how if you should be ashamed of anyone, Scott Ritter, it should be Americans who are unable to stop a genocide from happening due to their president and the president that they elected, the administration that is carrying out this over year-long genocide outright, being live streamed to us. The American people are cowards. Okay, if you want to have any anger, it's misplaced right now. It should be aimed at your fellow citizens. It should be aimed at us. It should be aimed at yourself. Don't shame the Palestinians.
They swing back and forth because whatever they try falls short.
This is why Scott Ritter should have listened to Noam Chomsky. He's almost there.
They believe devoutly that at some point in time, whether it's in their lifetime or not, somehow, some way.
Yeah, right? We could have forced our president to make one phone call. I mean, that's all it would take. But no. We should be mad at Americans for not striking the economy over this.
Israel will fail, and they will receive their justice.
That's faith-based as opposed to fact-based. What are the people when again? This is me as an outsider. I don't want to pretend to tell people who live in the region their history.
Well, you just did.
But what in God's name are you saying is good about Lebanon? We're grateful for what? That the French-based system of carving Lebanon up into fiefdoms, permanent fiefdoms, that gives the presidency to a Maronite, gives the Speaker of the Parliament to
I was speaking
a Sunni.
I was speaking about they were happy for the Lebanese people who were being bombed by Israel, because of the fact they were showing solidarity with Gaza.
So Israel wins again.
Unfortunately,
and the Lebanese lose again.
Unfortunately, so in the short term, if history ended today, which it hasn't, and it won't, if history ended today, then yes, Israel has killed hundreds of thousands of people, and they've weakened Syria, and they've taken more strategic land in the Golan Heights. But history has not ended today, and these struggles are generational. If you talk to Palestinians who are much,
I love that Ahmad is big brothering Scott Ritter. It's like Scott Ritter's acting like the child, and the young dude here has got to pick up the slack.
Older, even in this situation, they still see hope, they still see light because they've lived through it. Their parents lived through it. Their grandparents lived through it, but they understand these struggles are generational, especially when you're dealing with an incredibly wealthy and militarily advanced and superior nation that's backed by the most advanced and most wealthy superpower in the history of the world.
The Taliban beat us. The Taliban beat us. The South Vietnamese lost. The North Vietnamese won. The Iraqis' resistance kicked us out of their country. Don't give me this America can't be beaten. We get beaten by the people that have the willpower to beat us. But if you're going to surrender because America's the all great power, then you're losers. And I'm sorry, that's the way. And Syria, let's hear.
Wow, cold-blooded. He's like, I know. I mean, in one sense, it's like, yeah, they did, like South Vietnam, all this. you're right, but like, it's too normal. I don't know. His rhetoric is too normalizing the empire. He's like, you gotta beat us. In order to be the man, you gotta beat the man. Even Rathbone's girl is like, bro, what? Somebody said that. Yeah, you're loser. Basically, Johnny. I mean, you guys are on point. You're quoting Scott Ritter by saying, you're losers who deserve your children killed. Yeah. It's sort of the same as, it's sort of similar is what he's saying. Big talk from Scott. Expect to see him on the range. When I'm there, I'm calling bullshit. What's up, Cobra Commander? Scott is a Marine. Maybe that's the problem. He's too, like, hoorah. He's, like, too much hoorah from Scott Ritter. Scott Hoorah Ritter.
Just set the record straight. What is Syria? It's a fake nation. I don't want to hear about Syria. What is it? It was part of the Ottoman Empire. And then at the end of World War I, you had the Treaty of Lausanne was 2023, Sèvres 2020. A French goddamn mandate came in and carved it up. Carved it up out.
1920? Why did you say 2020?
Surrender because America's the all great power, then you're losers. And I'm sorry, that's the way. And Syria, let's just set the record straight. What is Syria? It's a fake nation. I don't want to hear about Syria. What is it? It was part of the Ottoman Empire. And then at the end of World War I, you had the Treaty of Lausanne was 2023, Sèvres 2020. A French goddamn mandate came in and carved it up. Carved it up out of nothing.
Scott, unfortunately, that's what the British and the United States Empire both did to the Middle East. They carved it up.
The British and the French sat there and played games, trying to create something that wasn't. A Syrian nation that never existed. Never existed. And then
This motherfucker's obtuse, man.
in 1946, Syria becomes a republic, but what is it? They don't know who they are. Meanwhile, the Turks are up there saying, nah, we don't agree with anything that's happened. You belong to us still.
Scott, United States is a fake nation.
And then you get the Ba'athist revolt because Syria was
You want to talk about a fake something? Talk about a fake. You want to talk about a fake nation? Let's talk about Israel.
You have Nasserites. You have the Muslim Brotherhood. You have another group, the Syrian communists or socialists or whatever, and it's dysfunctional, and it plays upon old, landowner, oppressed working class relationships. And the Ba'athists come in and say, if we're going to have a Syrian nation, we have to get rid of this artificiality. We have to impose something because Syria isn't a nation. It's like Iraq. Iraq was never a nation. The British made Iraq. They put Faisal in there, a Hashemite from Saudi Arabia, to rule over them because there's nobody there to rule them. What is it? You empower a Sunni
What is blood yapping about?
to suppress the Shia, or the Sunni minority, suppress the Shia minority. The Kurds are always played off against each other. Fake.
Bro is lost in the sauce.
The Ba'athists came in and said, we're going to define what this nation is. And they made an effort. In both cases, they have fallen. But I don't buy into this that Assad and the Ba'athists are evil. Because what is the alternative? There is no Syrian nation. Who are the people rising up today? Muslim Brotherhood? They were made illegal in the 60s for a reason. Because they didn't do good things for Syria. And then they continued to operate. And then in 1982, they rose up. It wasn't that Hafez al-Assad said, hey, this morning I'm going to go in and slaughter the citizens of Hama. They rose up and they attacked a military academy. They began a conflict, and Assad broke their back and drove them out of. And now they festered in
Dude needs a spa day. That's pretty funny.
now they've come back. That's what we're talking about. That's not Syrian nation. That's the Muslim Brotherhood. What about the Nasserites, the Syrian nationalists that fled? They've come back too, but they don't know how to work with each other. They don't have a history of working with each other. And you know what's happened? Just this morning, I think this morning or yesterday, Recep Erdogan, the new Sultan of Turkey, has said, yeah, we're taking it all. We're taking Aleppo, we're taking Idlib, we're taking Raqqa, and we're taking Damascus.
Can you be specific about his quote? I think you're paraphrasing it. What exactly did he say? Because I didn't see
He spoke to the AKP, and he said that Turkey is going to bring back the provinces it lost at the end of World War I. Now we get back to the Treaty of Sèvres and the Treaty of Lausanne and how important those were. Turkey felt betrayed by the French and the British when it came to Aleppo, when it came to Mosul, and now Erdogan said we're going to reverse that mistake of history. So what is the Syrian nation now? You're going back to be an Ottoman. You're going to be an extension of a modern Ottoman Empire.
So let's try to refocus the conversation because we've covered a lot of ground.
But I think this is imperative to say because people come at me as if I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about.
No,
and I know the history better apparently than some Syrians know their history. Because they forget inconvenient things. They forget what dysfunction existed in Syria prior to the Ba'athist revolt. They forget what the Ba'athists were trying to achieve. And they forget the pressures they were put on the Ba'athists. I don't defend the Ba'athist tactics, but to say that Bashar al-Assad woke up out of nowhere and said, my job is to oppress the Syrian people is garbage. The people that opposed Bashar al-Assad were people that opposed the Ba'athist vision of a Syrian nation state that never existed.
So let me ask you this. Who consented to this Ba'athist vision?
They carried out a revolution.
The Hafez al-Assad carried out a revolution.
Before Hafez al-Assad, the Ba'athists carried out a revolution.
But how did Hafez al-Assad come to power?
Oh, okay. The Ba'athists came in, and what happened is they took over, and then there were counter-revolutions, and the Syrian military was taken over by the military wing of the Ba'athist Party in order to make themselves coup-proof, kicked out everybody but the Alawites. And so the Alawites took over.
So they took power through military coup.
Correct.
Mostly bloodless military coup. But they took power through a military coup,
Yep.
and then they purged the government, and they filled it with one minority group. That's
purged
not
the government
consent of the Syrian people. I think, look, I appreciate your
There
passion.
were no Syrian people. Let's stop. When you say the Syrian people, what are you talking about?
We're talking in the modern context of Syrian people who live in Syria. Those are the Syrian people. I understand what the point that you're trying to make, but let's step back a little bit. I think when we're trying to analyze the situation geopolitically broadly, we forget about the actual human beings on the ground. You just mentioned to me earlier that you don't believe Bashar al-Assad was evil. I disagree with you on that. You're more than welcome to have that opinion. Yeah. But let me just describe for you an example, and this is something I had to do for myself, because as I zoomed out and I was so committed to we need to defeat Israel and we need to improve the situation for the Palestinian people, I started to forget many of the reasons why people hated Bashar al-Assad, actual everyday Syrians who live there, who have family members there. Now, you mentioned the situation in Hama, but in general, if you expressed opposition to Bashar al-Assad, even if it was just a joke, you'd be arrested and beaten. And I've seen these videos, and if I can show them to you later, I can show them to you now if you want. These thugs, the secret police who worked for Bashar al-Assad, they arrest people, put them in jail, and they start slapping their face. Slapping the shit out of them, humiliating them, telling them, who's your God? In Arabic, min rabbak, who's your God?
I still feel like this, this is still the United States' fault, You want to look at how extreme these regimes are in the Middle East. We can't neglect the analysis of what the United States is doing. The United States, as the sole superpower since World War II, has pursued a brutal policy of destabilization, and they have put, in a lot of cases, put these brutal dictators in charge. And if they haven't, they've created the social conditions by which something like that could be an inevitability. So for me, I can't ever escape that. I can't get over that elephant in the room, which is United States imperialism. And the moment I start hearing critiques of Assad or et cetera, et cetera, I have to, as if he's some, phenomenon of like evil genius or whatever. However he might be vilified, I can't see him in the light of being some singularly evil person that is just isolated from world events that are, happening around him. Does that make sense? And so I don't know. I'm kind of caught in the middle between. I don't like how Scott Ritter is blaming the subjugated people. I think his anger is misplaced. But yet I don't agree fully with Ahmad. Not in the sense of making Assad out to be this evil dictator, which I'm sure he was. I'm sure he was a awful. I can only know what Syrians tell me, and I'm not, like I've said before, I didn't live under his rule or anything, but I'm looking at things once again, and you can take it with a grain of salt. I'm looking at it as an American and understanding that the United States is the biggest superpower, the world's greatest terrorist, certainly in the Middle East, and you can't mention any of the secondary aspects of Assad or Ayatollah Khomeini or Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, any of whatever the makeup of the Middle East is right now. That is the United States doing. That's, I think, what is my point, is that the United States is the most consequential player on the world stage and has shaped the world in the way that it has wanted. And so these are all aspects of that. And, I think the world would look a lot different if the United States just packed up, got out of the Middle East. That's all I'm trying to say.
God is your God.
Mm-hmm.
These people violently oppressed, beaten, tortured innocent human beings, teenagers, kids, and told them, who's your God? They want them to commit blasphemy, which for Muslims, as you know, to declare anyone as God other than the one God is worse than death. It's a betrayal of your own values and beliefs. And Bashar al-Assad's thugs would do that on his behalf to sustain his regime that his father stole through military coup. And then he purged other people in the government and had one minority come in where they take the resources for themselves and they pool it at the top and they say it's better if we're in power because we have a better vision. Well, it's not better for the Syrian people. And even though I want to see a strong Syrian state and the axis of resistance have the strength to try and liberate Palestine, to echo what Palestinians are saying, we can't prioritize the alleviating of suffering for the Palestinians at the expense of the Syrians, who for decades suffered under this regime. Bashar al-Assad, in my opinion, is a dictator, thug, criminal who was only in power because of nepotism. We talked about this last night. He wasn't even he didn't even have a political career. He wasn't.
That's also just sort of be like the state of the world, okay?
Dedicated to any vision. His older brother died, and they decided we need to pass power like a dynasty in a supposed government with elections, and this is a presidency, to my son, to my blood, to maintain this regime that we have going on. And for decades, they claimed they were part of resistance to Israel. In 50 years, did they take back an inch of the Golan Heights? No. And as we're seeing now, as we're hearing more and more reports come out about Bashar al-Assad, when Russia and Iran gave him an opportunity, hey, let us reform your military, let the Axis play more of a role in Syria, he would turn them down. And he would say he felt that his position was strengthened if he did more business with Saudi Arabia and UAE, which demonstrates what? That he was not committed to the interests of the Syrian people. He was not committed to the axis of resistance. He was committed to himself staying in power. It was seesaw diplomacy. He was playing political games at the expense of everyone else. He destroyed Syria in the process. Bashar al-Assad was evil.
I'm not going to forget evil. Really? Now we want to get into evilness. A fucking head chopper is in charge of Syria today. That's evil. Jolani is evil. And the fact that people ignore this and don't call it out is absurd and it's mind-boggling.
Fair, but that's whataboutism.
But now
that is whataboutism.
Okay, but now let's go to other whataboutisms, okay?
don't know if it's whataboutism. I mean, what was replaced, it's directly consequential to what came before. It's sort of like saying we judging pre-revolutionary conditions to post-revolutionary governments is whataboutism. I mean, it's like, was it an improvement or was it not? And I think Scott's saying, you want to talk about evil? Look at what's happened. Look at who's in charge right now. A literal beheader. The Al Qaeda adjacent Al Julani, who's, apparently he's beheaded children and this mass murderer, evil guy apparently. But so you want to talk about evil? Al CIA, yeah. You want to talk about evil? Let's talk about the CIA. And the CIA funded Al Qaeda and ISIS.
I'm not going to defend the Assad regime. Everything you said was true.
But you understand why I said that.
I know
Because
why you said that. But let me
you're
tell
saying
you,
you don't want to defend him, but you just defended
now
him
what do you
earlier
want me
when
to
you said he
defend?
wasn't evil.
What do you want me to defend the other people, the people going up against him? How can I defend people who take CIA money? How can I defend people who take
Okay, this
Turkish
is an excellent
intelligence
question.
money?
You pose a great question. You pose an excellent question, and this is what this is one of the questions I want to ask. This is what I want to talk about. Okay, in the modern context, modern warfare today, can any group of people on Earth fight for quote unquote their freedom, which I know is a cringe term, but can any group of people on Earth fight for their interests without the involvement of any foreign power?
Taliban did a hell of a job.
They didn't take any support
Of course they did, but they did a hell
from
of
who?
a job.
From who?
Taliban took support from Saudi Arabia, from Pakistan. Some people would say from India.
Okay, did they do that out of the kindness of their hearts, or did they do so out of some type of geopolitical interest? There was an alignment
What I can
between
say
the
is
interests
that-
of Saudi Arabia and India and the Taliban, and they happened to align on that issue, and only that issue, because the Taliban doesn't agree with them on
Well, I
many
would just say
much
this,
else.
that the Taliban knew damn well who they were. They knew they were Pashtun tribes. They understood their history, and they never betrayed their history once. They didn't take money and become something that they weren't. Okay, they were something. They took resources, but they sacrificed with their blood, their bodies. They fought.
Okay, so why don't you think the Syrians did so? By the way, many mujahideen from all over the world traveled to Afghanistan. It wasn't just, Afghani members of the Taliban. They were foreign fighters as well. In Syria, what's the difference?
Well, the Mujahideen that traveled were under the aegis of Al Qaeda. The Taliban were Pashtun. You don't get into the Pashtun tribal system.
But you
by
have
being outside.
but you have crossover. You have foreign fighters who come to fight, and they come for a cause, and they happen to fight in one group. That group sucks. They go join another group. That group dies, gets eliminated. This is just the nature of modern warfare. So yes, the Syrians took money through the CIA Timber Sycamore program. They took money facilitated by Jordan, by Turkey, coming from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, where CIA weapons and training got to these groups. Yes, they did. Iran and Russia backed Bashar al-Assad. This is just the game, unfortunately. But do the Syrian people still have agency? Let's go
They
to this
don't.
core question.
The
Why?
Syrian people, well, they may think they have agency, but as I just told you, Turkey has won. All these Syrian people jumping up saying, and we talked about this last night, and some people said, well, we may have to subject ourselves to Turkish rule for
And how do they
several
describe
decades.
it? How do they describe it? They preferred it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but then what are you? What are you? That's what I said. I got a little emotional, but this just proves my point, that there is no Syrian nation. If you have to subject yourself to Turkish rule to buy time for you to decide who you are.
Bro, you're describing United States foreign policy to a T. This is what the United States does to the entire world. You must be open to Western capital accumulation. You must turn your country into a corporate plantation, and if you don't, then the United States will bomb and starve you in various ways and means. So, what's your point, There's the host nation, and then there's vassal states that don't actually have sovereignty, even though they have a name for the country. But I don't think that you're saying anything that's not already happening in droves committed by the United States.
which is what they said. That means you don't know who you are, therefore you can't call yourself a Syrian nation.
These Syrians yesterday, and I can't speak for all of them, but I can tell you I've definitely shared this vision. But they've also told you they don't care about just being called Syrian. I mean, the brother who spoke to you yesterday, he basically told you 150 years ago we would have never described ourselves as Syrian. He's echoing your
fake
point.
Nation, yeah.
It's not just that it's a fake.
I mean, so is Ukraine.
It's just that we don't really, they don't want to see Bashar al-Assad go because they're so super nationalistic. Sometimes seeking independence requires, it like manifests itself as nationalism. Like, I support Palestinian independence, but that's like pretty much the only kind of, it's only because they're under occupation that I care so much about their identity. But like as a Kurd, for example, I don't care if we have an independent state. To me, playing the game of nationalism isn't necessarily better for the region. So when these Syrians say that they're happy to subject themselves to Turkey, as you describe it, it's because they feel that the Turk doing so will be better for them. And whether they're right or wrong, I don't know. I mean, all the time will tell. But the point is that they describe to you that they have this greater vision of a unified Middle East.
Correct.
And they believe that is something that Sunni Islam is important to, which I won't dive too much into. But they believe that is, as they described, a true Islamic state with respect for minorities and different religious groups that actually has the ability and the desire and the intent to resist Israel. So it's complicated, but
But let me just, again, because I have personal experience with the CIA and how they operate in the Middle East. I saw it firsthand in Iraq, and I saw how they do the divide and conquer.
Yes.
All right, they lead people to believe that something's going to happen and then it isn't going to happen. So on the one hand, they want, okay, they're willing to take CIA money and Turkish money and get direction from the CIA and get guidance from the Turkish intelligence and all this to achieve this outcome.
Yes.
Okay, and they achieved it. Hats off to them. Congratulations, Bashar al-Assad is gone. And now they want to create this multi-dimensional, diverse Muslim nation that's going to stand up to Israel. Do you see the fatal flaw in your argument? Who's the number one supporter of Israel? The United States. Who is funding this overthrow, this effort? The United States. Do you think the United States is actually going to create something that's going to go up against it?
I'm not naive. No, I don't. But what I do think is that interests can align and then they can diverge. So that's my point.
Right, but who controls these groups inside Syria that have come in? Who controls them?
I mean, alliances shift every single day. Erdogan currently believes that he has a lot of influence over HTS, and we don't know. Look, HTS, like you said last night, they had 15 to 20,000.
Scott probably thinks Ahmad is being naive here.
They won an offensive because Bashar's regime was gutted. Like, they weren't willing to fight anymore, and they lost. No one was expecting that. So these guys have come into power, and they had no idea they were going to come into power. So we don't know that they're going to remain in power.
I'm coming up with
this situation is ongoing and developing.
I'm coming up with a new theory. It's a theory, but it's one that was informed by last night's meeting, because your colleagues' opinion, their willingness to submit to Turkish rule didn't come out of that wasn't invented last night. That's something that's clearly, I think, a legacy of what we call the Syrian nation's history as an extension of Ottoman Empire, where you did under the caliphate have a Islamic state that had diverse groups and it functioned properly. So I think it's residual, maybe it's muscle memory or whatever. And if that's the case, then that leads me to believe that Turkey, Russia, and Iran may have reached a similar conclusion, and that conclusion was transmitted to the Syrian army, who was told, what you believe in no longer exists. Stand aside because this new thing is coming in. There's no other way for me to explain what happened with the Syrian army.
So, I mean, there's definitely an affinity for the history of the Ottoman Empire. A lot of Muslims look at the Ottomans with pride because it was a representation of a successful, powerful, stable civilization that existed for many centuries. And there's a lot of history. I mean, Muslims love to travel to Istanbul and walk the streets and see the old mosques that are hundreds of years old, beautiful infrastructure. And they look at Turkey today and they see a modern economy, a modern state, organized. Obviously, you still have levels of corruption, but it's nowhere near what you see, in these other states. And they have elections, and they have a strong military. And Turkey is basically like a Muslim European country. And Muslims want that for themselves. They want that in Syria. They want that in Iraq. They want that in other places. And Erdogan understands that. There's a very powerful force of quote unquote soft power, this cultural influence. And they, Erdogan, he produces, I wrote a tweet about this. Erdogan, not himself, but Turkey produced this famous show, Ertugrul. You've heard of it, right? Mm-hmm. Ertugrul. It's about the father of the founder of the Ottoman Empire. And it's soap opera bullshit. It's so romanticized.
No, I've seen it.
Yeah, some of the history is accurate, but most of it is like, he's galloping a horse in slow motion for like 45 minutes. Yep. And he's like saving the damsel in distress every single episode. Yeah. And there is no complexity to his character. He is morally infallible. And that's the story.
And the same facial expression the entire time.
The entire time, and he's so handsome and buff. He's got the beard, and they got their crew. That's propaganda, and it's implanting in people's minds, calling upon them to remember this glorified history in which the Turks were at the forefront of the Muslim world, and that they can rebuild that again. And people eat that up because they truly desire that, and many Syrians, I think, prefer that over, Iran's presence in Syria, over Russia's presence in Syria. And they have their reasons why. So definitely that's it plays an important role in why people like, the Syrians you met yesterday tell you why they prefer Turkey. Like, what's the difference? Iran forcing themselves on Syria or Turkey?
I have no problem with
them.
They're
very similar.
I have no problem with them preferring Turkey. But don't tell me that's because you think Turkey is going to help you stand up to Israel. Because I'm just here to tell you right now, the Turks will never stand up to Israel.
I agree with you.
Turkey is committed to having to becoming an energy hub, a gas hub. They're talking about bringing in the pipeline now, the one that Bashar al-Assad said no to. Yeah. They're going to bring it in now. Yeah. Israel plays an important role. They're going to be pushing on Israel to bring their gas in. Combined, Turkey is going to become an energy hub for Europe. That's Turkey's economic future, and they're never going to throw that away for the cause of Palestine.
I agree with you. I think, unfortunately, many people in the region use the rhetoric of liberating Palestine for propaganda purposes to advance their own interests. And that's actually one of the criticisms people have of the Axis of Resistance, that they use anti-imperialist rhetoric as a smokescreen to cover their own expansionist agenda.
Well, how many Hezbollah died as a smokescreen?
Well, I'm not talking about the Hezbollah-specific troops, because those men did give their lives.
And how many Iranians died in from 2011 up until 2020 defending the Axis of Resistance?
Yeah, but they had to conquer other Muslims to do it in Syria, and that's what's so bothersome to Syrians. If you understand the complexity, right, for a Syrian who wants to see Palestine liberated, and the people claiming to do so are forcing them to live under a regime of a guy who beats you and tortures you and forces you to declare him as God, right? So it's complex for a Syrian.
No, I get it. I totally. I'm not here to debate that. I think, though, what we've come to is the uncomfortable realization that Palestine has yet again been betrayed.
I don't like to think that they've been betrayed, because at the end of the day, Hamas, they carried out this attack on October 7th. They didn't consult other people. They decided it was in their interest to do so. And if history ended today, then people can interpret the situation and decide for themselves whether they think that was the right choice. But history hasn't ended today, and so we'll see. Shortly after October 7th, actually up until Hezbollah's ceasefire, I think many people would argue that October 7th was probably the right decision to make. Now, people look at it, and Palestinians themselves, I can tell the tone is changing. People are saying that was a horrible decision. What were they thinking? That might change in a year. It might take 10 years. I don't know. So
But I don't like to think that the Palestinians were betrayed. You know, they were betrayed definitely by the regimes, but by the people themselves, they definitely support the liberation of Palestine. And, you know, Scott, the way you have to see it, the way Egyptians see it, the way Syrians see it, the way Iraqis used to see it, I don't know if they still see it this way because the government has changed so much, but they view themselves as also under occupation by puppet leaders that are backed by, you know, Western imperialist forces. And they believe that if Palestine is to be freed, if the entire region is to improve, that the occupation that they find themselves under, which obviously expresses itself very different than a Palestinian living under Israeli occupation, but you get my point. They believe that they need to replace their leaders with more just and righteous leaders. And the Syrians are hopeful, not in Jolani specifically, as Syrians told you yesterday. They are very suspicious and they're waiting to see. But they are hopeful that, you know, better leadership will come, and they're desperate for it. So,
Can you name one just and righteous leader in the Arab world?
so I can't, and I don't like to think, I don't like to romanticize leaders in that way. I can tell you in my youth, I was very passionate about Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. You know, he defeated the Crusaders, he liberated Jerusalem. But as I read more of the history, I saw, you know, some of the things that he did. And I understand that we have a tendency to romanticize our leaders historically. And we overlook that by being in power and wielding power, you have to do things that achieve power. And that means, you know, committing acts that some people would consider immoral.
Like Saddam Hussein, like Bashar al-Assad.
Yes, but the difference is Salah ad-Din had a declared intent for decades to liberate Palestine, and he tried repeatedly for many years, and he failed in doing so, and it was only in the end he found success. But it took him many years. Bashar al-Assad and his father's regime had 50 years, just about as much time as Salah ad-Din and Nur ad-Din Zengi, the master he came up under. And they didn't even take back or try to take back a single inch of the Golan Heights. Saddam Hussein, yeah, he fired some Scud missiles at Israel, but Saddam Hussein also, you know, destroyed his country, serving as a proxy, essentially fighting Iran, invaded Iran. 1 million Iranis were killed, 1 million Iraqis were killed, and in the end, they lost territory. And my uncle actually, as a Kurd, was drafted and forced to fight against Iran, even though some of our relatives are Irani. And he was, you know, taken as a prisoner of war, and he was in jail in Iran for 8 years. 8 years of his life gone, forced to fight and kill other Muslims, even if they're Shiite, on behalf of a leader for what? You know, so it's complicated, and we're not happy with it as people from the Middle East. But despite all of this, we have no other choice but to be hopeful. We're not naive or delusional about what has taken place in Syria. We know the CIA's involvement and others as well. And I'm not necessarily supportive of, you know, the war or the HTS rebels and their offensive. You know, it's bigger than me, and it's outside of my control. At the end, Bashar fell. So I just tried my best to understand it, deal with this new reality. And in the process, the only position really that I've taken, and that I felt compelled to do so, is I say Bashar al-Assad is a dictator. And I say that in response to, you know, certain people who praise him online. And I don't like to deal in good or evil either. But in this case, you know, I feel compelled to say Assad was evil, or at least he committed many evil acts in response to those who praise him as a hero. And
what I'll say about Bashar al-Assad is a failed leader.
Yeah,
that's
there's no doubt about that.
Right. I mean, they're. But let me put this out there, because, you know, now we're getting down to some fundamentals. Mm-hmm. I have a daughter who has watched what I've been doing about Palestine and taken heart, and she's become very active, and she wants to become even more active in standing up for a Palestinian state opposing Israel. Based on what you just told me here, where we're talking about, it ain't going to happen for a long time. Okay, we now know that the Trump administration is coming in. They're declaring war on people who support Palestine. If my daughter goes in the street, she can be criminalized, put in jail, ruin her life, ruin her career, and all that. You see, that's something that I wasn't going to say willing to let happen to her, but if you're fighting a good cause that has hope, then
Well,
you can
Scott,
say
do
the
we-
sacrifice.
do we
How
fight
can
to
I
win?
possibly
do we fight
tell
to
her?
win? Do
Huh?
we fight? Do we fight to win, or do we fight because it's right?
No, I fight to win.
You hope to win.
No, I
But-
fight to win.
So you wouldn't fight for a cause that was just without the guarantee of victory.
With no guarantee of victory?
With no guarantee of victory.
No, I'm not suicidal. First of all, what I'll do is make a guarantee of victory.
You can't do that.
Of course you can.
You can't do that.
You die trying. Of course you can. You don't surrender. There's always an operational imperative out there for you to do something. You don't simply launch kamikaze attacks to die in a
No, definitely,
you
you
regroup,
have
you
a
hold,
strategy,
you
but the
suppress, you
point
build
is-
cells, you move forward, you find a political thing, an economic way to do it. There's 100 different ways to push towards a victory without surrendering or dying.
But the Palestinians haven't surrendered.
They just did.
No, they have not surrendered. They'll never surrender.
There
This
won't
is
be a
why-
Palestine. You understand Gaza is about to be depopulated.
I do understand.
You understand
that.
the
And
West
it
Bank
breaks-
is going to be
and it breaks-
dismantled.
And it breaks my heart, but this is just another blow against the people that have proven their resolve. And unfortunately, the way, what Muslims kind of have, people from the Middle East, Palestinian Christians included, I bet. I don't know how to describe this. I don't want to call it suicidal, but they understand that things have to get worse before they can get better.
Well, they're certainly getting worse.
They're certainly getting worse, but in a way, it somehow has given people hope. This genocide in Gaza has still given people hope. That might sound irrational, but it's because they know that at least an attempt is being made, an attempt was made, that people are discussing it. We don't have faith in these institutions, but at least there's a court case against Israel on the topic of genocide, right? So believe me, if we could guarantee victory, we would, but we can't.
But my concern is every single gain that's been made since October 7th, and there have been many gains, are going to be reversed in the next 4 years.
Yeah, and
there won't be any court case against Israel. There won't be any court case against Israeli officials.
Yeah.
The nations that said that they want to support Palestine will be compelled to reverse that decision.
Right.
And people will walk away from the Palestinian cause. Saudi Arabia will normalize relations with Israel, and Israel will get the greater Israel that it's achieving. You say that Bashar al-Assad didn't fight for an inch of the Golan Heights. Well, actually, he did in 1973. They fought a war and lost a lot of men trying to retake the Golan Heights from Israel.
I believe that was before Assad regime came into power. I think his father came to power in 78.
Okay, you're right, but Syria
If
fought.
I'm correct, I
but,
could be mistaken.
You're
Maybe
probably
it was
correct on that.
68.
But what I will say is this: overnight, the Jolani government gave up even more of the Golan Heights. Israel has annexed the totality of the Golan Heights, including the Syrian Golan Heights, and is moving
but
to
even
annex
if they
even
wanted
more.
to do something about it, they couldn't. And this is something that kind of bothers.
But couldn't you say that same thing about the Assad government? Even if they wanted to do something about it, they couldn't.
Yeah, you could say that. But, they had 50 years. These guys have been in control partially for like 12 days, so like, let's give them some time. Yeah, I mean, the tanks are there now, but I mean, they're powerless to do something. Like, they've been in power for, not even in power. They've been in this weird, what's the word for it?
Vacuum?
Vacuum. Yeah, they're in this limbo. They're not even in power. They're in limbo right now. People don't even know what the next move is going to be. What are the Kurds going to do? Nobody knows what's about to happen next. And people are like, why aren't you fighting Israel? What
The Kurds are going to get wiped out by Turkey.
to do? The Turks gave them enough to launch an offensive in Aleppo, not to fight the Israeli government, so it takes time. And I'm not necessarily defending, whatever government comes into power. I'm not naive or delusional about this fact. I just think that these struggles take generations. They take many lives, many lifetimes. And in 4 years, everything you said, that might be the case. But in 10 or 20 years,
Do
October
you know that Ahmad is an anarchist? I don't know that. Is that true?
may be remembered as the event that triggered a domino of effects that
I guess he's sort of talking like one, huh?
bring about some kind of positive change. And
One can only hope. But I want to ask you, as a Kurd, what do you think about what's going on in Raqqa right now? I mean, in Kobani.
So I'm not following the specifics as closely. I haven't been able to, but I can just tell you one. So my experience, my identity as a Kurd is a little different than the average Kurd. I grew up here in the United States. I barely speak Kurdish. It's pathetic, actually. My Arabic is actually better than my Kurdish, and my Arabic is pathetic. So linguistically, obviously, I don't really speak Kurdish. I don't have a very strong connection to the language. I've gone back many times to Kurdistan and Iraq to visit my family, and I've eaten the food, I have the outfits and stuff like that, but I'm not like a patriotic, nationalistic Kurd. I'm not the average Kurd. For me, I probably believe more in the power and the potential of a unified Middle Eastern region that had respect for all ethnicities, dignity for all ethnicities and religions in the region. I'm not passionate about Kurdish independence. I understand that, being a landlocked country sandwiched between neighboring states that would be upset at you for that independence is not necessarily better for you. And it just, makes you essentially.
But can I now, again, I
tool
don't
to be
mean to
divided.
be a dick here, but I'm going to be a dick.
No, go ahead. Just don't be too big a dick. I can't handle it.
Well, I'm sorry. When the Turks come in to Kobani and they advance further into this Kurdish region, and they capture Kurds who are simply trying to fight for their homeland, their freedom, their national identity, and they put them in a prison cell and they slap them, and they say Erdogan is your God. Say Erdogan is your God. Say it. Slap.
I've never
Then
seen,
they do it. They take them out and they summarily execute them. They take the Kurdish girls and they rape them. Then they put them down and they murder them. They slaughter them. They treat the Kurds like animals. So here's my point. Is that okay in the concept of a greater
Well, has
region?
that happened?
Of course it happens. Go ask the Kurds. It happens all the time. If you're going to believe, and I'm not doubting any of the narrative about what Bashar al-Assad did, if you're going to buy into that and say that's evil, then why isn't what Erdogan is doing to the Kurds similarly evil? And how can it be tolerated as, well, it has to happen to create a greater Middle East thing, when Assad would say, well, I have to suppress the Muslim Brotherhood to create a viable, modern Syrian state. I'm not defending Assad, but we can't ignore what the Turks do against the Kurds either.
No, I understand.
That's a principled point, I think.
The point you're making is, is even if there are legitimate crimes committed against your people, should you decide to take up arms, even though you believe it's fighting for your interests and your homeland and your dignity and your rights, should you make that decision to pick up guns and fight, knowing that you're going to become a tool for these foreign influences like the United States, for example, and the CIA? That's your point, right?
No, my point is, how can you turn a blind eye to what Erdogan does to the Kurds while condemning?
I don't turn a blind eye, and I don't. When I was younger, I supported the Syrian revolution and the armed struggle afterwards. Older now, if I could repeat it, I wouldn't necessarily support that. I understand that picking up a gun and deciding to fight involves many other agendas and other powerful forces that aren't necessarily interested in your rights, and you spill a lot of blood to achieve.
And it implicates the lives of innocent people.
Yes. So
who get caught up in the horror.
yes, that's
of
true.
this conflict.
And I mean, millions of people have been traumatized, and there is a generation of people now that have to recover and heal from that trauma while trying to organize a state and have a functioning economy and hopefully build up the strength to defend themselves against people who would invade them and oppress them. My point is not to say that we should just start violently overthrowing certain leaders in the world. I understand that if you want power, it's best expressed through the barrel of a gun.
At the same time, though,
Oh, he's
I
quoting
know how
Mao now.
destructive it can be. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the
Okay,
best
I
course
accept
of
that.
action
So
is.
we agree this is a horribly complicated situation.
Oh, absolutely.
And
My only
there's-
point
there-
is
and
he's not a
there's
hero.
And there's
He's-
no, I'm not going to buy, I never said he was a hero.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that Bashar al-Assad inherited a system. He didn't create a system.
Yeah.
He inherited a system. I believe he made as good a faith. First of all, I think he was totally inadequate as a leader. He didn't want to be. His passion wasn't there. He was captured by a corrupt Ba'athist regime that had military and civilian interests in place
That pre-existed him. Yeah.
that pre-existed him, and he made efforts. There are documented cases of him making efforts to clean things up and to get the pushback, and he didn't have support. He's all by himself, and so he became a de facto prisoner of the system. And every time he tried to make a go of it, something happened. And again, because he's not the strongest leader, for instance, when the drought in 2006 happened, it wasn't he who failed. It was the Syrian government who failed. He's a figurehead of a president, and he gets the blame for it. And so the hatred accumulates. And then 2011 comes along. It's not that, he is the figurehead of a system that wasn't going to go down quietly, that fought brutally, did horrible things. I'm not defending any of the tactics used by the Syrians, but I am going to say
you and I, as I guess, if I may call myself an analyst as well, I'm not on your level, but if I may call myself an analyst,
you're probably better than
you
I am.
and I have the stomach and the interest in this type of context. I agree with you. The drought was impactful. The Ukrainian wheat shortage a couple of years later, the global economic recession, all of these things.
2008,
the Arab Spring took place not in a vacuum, but there's a lot of context that's important. But I think for the average Syrian who had to live under it, they're not interested in that context. So that doesn't mean you and I can't talk about it.
I understand
but I just
that,
mean
but that's
for the person who lives under that, all they
Correct.
care about, they're not thinking about the greater geopolitical ramifications
100%.
and the context. They're
100%.
thinking about, is this guy a good leader for me or not?
But that's not what you said. You said he was evil.
Yeah, I did.
I don't think he was evil. I think the system might have been evil.
So
the system that held him captive.
I will take back. I will not say he is evil. The battle between good and evil takes place in every human heart.
Right.
If I were in his position, God knows what I would do. So I'm grateful I'm not in his position. I would never want to be in his position. So I won't call him evil, but I think what he did was evil. And I say that in response to, of course, you earlier when you said he wasn't evil and he didn't do evil. So I said that because I felt the need to push back and provide that context.
I think we're getting caught up in semantics right now because we're missing the bigger picture, which we agree upon, which was the system he inherited was a fundamentally flawed system. And because of his weakness as a leader, it only got worse. And if you are a Syrian who...
I mean, look, Scott, if the interest really was for him to implement reform, the Syrian revolution was literally about reform. I mean, some people said, yes, he has to go no matter what. But, other people, and before these other governments started funding, Turkey, for example, prior to training the rebels and funding and providing weapons, prior to that, offered to be part of a process to assist Bashar al-Assad, one, with economic investments to improve the situation, but also to provide a pathway. And I'm not trying to defend Erdogan or make Turkey look like angelic here, but the truth is that they tried to provide a pathway for reform, and Bashar rejected it. So he had an opportunity to do so. He decided not to.
He rejected it because the reforms would disenfranchise the corrupt,
which was the whole point.
The power structure that he was at the top of. But here's the other thing I'll say. There's a lot of criticism about Russia coming in 2015, the Iranians coming in. You are familiar with General Wesley Clark's statement made after 2001.
That's one of my questions. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so when we're talking about a master plan by the United States that's written in Israel to benefit Israel, it hinges on regime change, toppling these regimes. From a Russian perspective and Iranian perspective, when they look at a CIA-backed effort in 2011 to overthrow Bashar al-Assad.
If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. Also,
wow, it just ends mid-sentence.
If you'd like to support what we do, please consider...
All right, let's read this article that was written by a writer, journalist, professor of Brandeis University, Robert Kuttner, who post-mortemed the story about the congressional bill that Elon Musk nuked through his Twitter tirade. Like, what was that all about? This guy was featured in Democracy Now! Today. Yeah, how Musk outmaneuvered Trump. Here it is. Okay. So Elon Musk blew up a near complete bipartisan budget deal with an avalanche of tweets contending that it was too costly, luring Donald Trump into demanding that Republicans kill it. But Musk's real reason was that the agreement included painstakingly negotiated limits on American tech investment in China. Had that provision passed, it would have been costly to Musk's extensive Chinese Tesla operations and future AI plans. Between Tuesday and Thursday, the budget deal collapsed. Trump, following Musk's lead, threw in a new demand that the deal tackle the debt ceiling, always a politically tricky vote, but neither Democrats nor Republican fiscal hawks would give Trump that. In the end, legislators of both parties wanted to get home for Christmas, and both houses overwhelmingly passed a simple continuing resolution keeping the government funded at roughly present levels through March, plus disaster relief and farm aid. Musk succeeded in stripping out the China provision. Collateral damage included the loss of a bipartisan measure constraining abuses by pharmacy benefit managers, another limiting hotel and ticketing junk fees, and about 100 other bipartisan agreements. Late night, the Senate had managed to pass 2 bills that were jettisoned from the deal but had already passed the House. One of several provisions funding pediatric cancer research, and another transferring ownership of the derelict RFK Stadium to Washington, D.C. The mainstream media focused on the tick-tock of whether the government would shut down on Musk's surprising influence and the issue of the debt ceiling, but totally missed the China investment provision that was the real driver of the dispute. Now some of the more exemplary scribes, from Heather Cox Richardson and to E.J. Dionne, are picking it up. Did Trump miss it? Let's recall that Trump is a ferocious China hawk. Stopping U.S. investment in sensitive technologies that could help China has been a key element of the agenda for serious China experts in both parties. On that issue, Musk won and Trump was rolled. Trump got Rick-rolled. Trump's own goal in the budget deal was the debt ceiling. The failure to get that will come back to haunt him when the nation's borrowing limit expires next summer. House Republicans privately discussed a deal in a future reconciliation bill to exchange a $1.5 trillion debt ceiling increase for $2.5 trillion in mandatory spending cuts. Think Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and veterans benefits. $2.5 trillion in mandatory spending cuts. They're coming after more of our health care, more of our food stamps, more veterans benefits. So Democrats will probably have some future leverage on the debt ceiling. House Leader Hakeem Jeffries is already talking about forcing it to be permanently abolished, a good idea that would end future MAGA hostage taking. In contrast to Trump, Musk played his hand in a way that made sure that he won his objective and didn't mind sacrificing Trump's. In blessing the revised deal, which passed the House late Friday, 366 to 34, and the Senate 85 to 11, Musk disingenuously praised Congress for drastically shrinking the total spending. This was total bullshit. since the budget numbers of the original deal and final one were almost identical. But shrinking spending wasn't the goal. Keeping the government out of his China business was. In short, Musk outplayed Trump. Musk is not the sort of guy you can take to the woodshed. And what does that mean? I don't want to take nobody to the woodshed. I don't even have a woodshed, to be honest with you. And the inaugural is still a month away. I know they've already, there's already friction happening. Trump's not even in office yet. Excuse me, so sorry. It's late here. There will be more conflicts between the goals of President Musk and those of President Trump. Some of the slash and burn budget cutting that Musk is proposing, Social Security, blah, 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 will enrage Republican legislators and governors and threaten base Republican constituents, not to mention the deep differences over unfolding China policy. Who will outplay who then? I mean, I get that's what it meant, Pitchfork. Fabled on YouTube. Now play nice, okay? I know it's fun being a keyboard warrior and hurling insults from behind your thumbs. But let's be nice here, okay? Don't make me have to bring you to the kids' table. If we need to do it, we will. But remember, we are kind to other people, okay? Okay, it's fine. You apologized, we're good. Let's see. What else can we take a look at? Wow, the Menendez brothers.
It's good to see you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me on, Ashley. Appreciate it.
Okay, big question is how far into the mountain of evidence and paperwork and decades of files are you?
So I started on December 3rd, and we are getting through it. We are reviewing literally thousands of pages of confidential prison records. We've been going through 2 different months-long trials transcripts. Those number in the thousands of pages as well. I've had detailed meeting with the prosecutors involved with the case at all different points. I've got a meeting set up with the defense in early January. I intend to meet with every victim family member who would like to meet with me, also in early January. And after we conduct this rigorous analysis, we're going to formulate our position on both the habeas motion, that's the motion that has brought forward the new evidence, trying to get a new trial, as well as the resentencing motion, which deals with the sentence. And the sentence request is to turn a life without the possibility of parole sentence into life with the possibility of parole.
So out of all the 4 pathways, do you have a spidey sense on which one looks most promising for these brothers?
So there are actually just 3 pathways. The resentencing has to deal with changing some of the factors of the actual sentence and the conviction. You would knock down the special circumstances, which would create that life with the possibility of parole situation. But again, each one looks at different analyses. So for instance, the habeas motion, that's the one based on the 2 new pieces of evidence that the defense has set forward. You have to look at the legal standard. Is it new? Is it timely? Does it really upset all the other evidence that was presented at the trial to convict these people? And then that's a conviction that is withheld scrutiny on appeal. The clemency is a direct petition to the governor. And the governor, at any time he's been in power since 2019 till today, could grant clemency and let the Menendez brothers out of prison. This third path is resentencing. It's something that's somewhat unique to California and says that, look, we're not going to touch the underlying conviction necessarily, but if a DA or a court files a motion we're going to go ahead and allow rehabilitation and other factors to come into play in order to decide whether or not we want to change that sentence. And again, in this case, it's life without the possibility of parole to life with the possibility of parole.
Are any of those more likely than the others?
You know, it's interesting. They each have their own analysis. So a new trial analysis is really looking at the trial record. You don't go really beyond the trial record in order to determine whether or not they're entitled to a new trial. The resentencing, on the other hand, actually requires us to look beyond that. We have to look at rehabilitation. We have to look at other factors that are involved with the individual defendants. And then we have to make that call on whether A, resentencing is appropriate, and B, if so, what the new sentence should be. Right now, the recommendation is 50 years to life, which would then allow the Menendez brothers to go before a parole board. Now, the parole board has to do its own analysis. And even if they grant parole, it goes to Governor Newsom here in the state of California. He has 120 days to either agree with a grant of parole, send it back to a full parole board, or reverse that, which is exactly what he did in the conviction and the parole board's ruling.
You are so good at your job. You're so good at your job. I literally just wanted you to say whether any of those three had a better shot, and you went and told me all the stuff. Explain the three. You're not going to tell me, are you, whether one of those options is looking a little promising? That's all I'm looking for, sort of a choice 1, 2, or 3 looking better.
So, Ashley, you know I'm not going to speculate, and you know I'm not going to get in front of my skis on this. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to do that full analysis. And at that point, I'm not only going to be able to defend it in court, I'm going to be able to defend it on your show as well to all your viewers. Because I think the public
late
and the
January
Menendez
booking.
brothers, I'm telling you that everyone's looking. The Menendez brothers obviously are looking at this. The victim family members are looking at it. The public is looking at this. And what I've heard repeatedly is they said, Mr. Hochman, do your job. Do this rigorous analysis of the law and the facts. And when you've completed that analysis, that's what you find out.
I've written you down for a late January booking, but I know you have to go. I have a hard out for you 2 minutes ago, but I do want to ask you yes or no. Have you had a chance to talk with Governor Newsom about the clemency issue? He was waiting for you to be sworn in.
He has not reached out to me. I haven't reached out to him. On my end, it'd be a little preliminary because I don't have that answer that he's looking for. When I have that answer, I will be happy to speak to Governor Newsom. I'll be happy to speak to the public. We'll put it down in writing. I'm certainly happy to go back on your show and tell you all about it.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
Cameras in the courtroom today in Manhattan. So we actually saw Luigi Mangione with our own eyes as he appeared before a judge facing state charges, both first and second-degree murder. Now, here is Mangione, in his own words, pleading not guilty to the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
How do you plead to this indictment, sir? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
There you have it. Not guilty. Mangione's attorney then lodged a complaint with the judge. Now, apparently, she's not a fan of that perp walk from last week. We all remember how it looked. The scene behind me right now, the big show when he arrived here in New York City after being extradited from Pennsylvania. She also argued the state and federal authorities are kind of fighting over the spotlight now, and it's all coming, she says, at the expense of her client. Watch.
Like every other defendant, he's entitled to a presumption of innocence. But unfortunately, the way this has been handled so far, his rights are being violated. He's a young man, and he is being treated like a human ping pong ball between two warring jurisdictions here.
But the assistant district attorney on the case here in Manhattan actually says they've worked it out with the Justice Department, and it is the state case that is up first.
As we understand that we have primary jurisdiction, and we have been informed by the U.S. Attorney that they intend on allowing us to try our case first.
There you go first. That's the inside story. Meantime, quite a scene developing on the freezing cold streets outside the courthouse today. News Nation's Caitlin Becker was there. So are some of those Free Luigi protesters kind of making their voices heard. Caitlin joins us now. What's the latest from there?
You know, Connell, there were quite a bit of those protesters or supporters, however you want to call them, outside of court. They had noisemakers, they had signs, they had two chants that they kept kind of repeating. One was, hey, hey, ho, ho, CEOs have got to go. The other was Free Luigi. And it just kept going sort of like a record, broken record again and again and again. And Connell, some of these people started lining up to get a seat in the courtroom.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org.
My God, what happened? No. But why?
Cameras in the courtroom today.
People Magazine got a copy of the holiday menu at the MDC. So we're going to share. On Christmas Eve, the inmates get fruit, cereal, pastries, and milk. That's the breakfast on Christmas Eve day. Chicken or chickpea burger, along with rice and beans and fruit, and that is lunch. And then for dinner, it is turkey, sweet potato, and mixed vegetables. Let's move to the Christmas Day menu because it's better. Kind of looks like this. It's sort of the same for the breakfast as the Christmas Eve one, but lunch, things get real. Cornish game hen, or you can choose barbecued tofu. You get mac and cheese, and you get spinach, cranberry sauce, and a holiday dessert. I think the holiday dessert is TBA, but I can't wait to hear what holiday dessert means. For dinner, it is a lot less celebratory on Christmas. Like, a lot. Such a letdown. 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, potato chips, and fruit. That's Christmas dinner. I want to bring in 2 people who know a heck of a lot about what goes on inside MDC Brooklyn and how things change up during the holidays, because they've done some time there and they know it. Gene Borello is a former mob enforcer who served time in 4 North. That is the unit where Luigi Mangione is about to be moved and where P. Diddy's getting comfy. And Michael Franzese is a former capo for the Colombo crime family who also served time in MDC. And these 2 fellers are friends together and hopefully new friends of mine.
The Israeli Prime Minister has arrived at a Tel Aviv court for the 5th day in his long-running corruption trial. Benjamin Netanyahu is accused of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. If convicted, he faces up to 10 years in prison. Now, he denies any wrongdoing, describing the charges as absurd. Al Jazeera's Hamda Salhout is in the Jordanian capital, Amman.
Sounds like the Israeli court is being anti-Semitic, don't you guys think?
This because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting in Israel and in the occupied West Bank. So, Hamda, brief us on this trial, where we are in the proceedings and how dangerous this could be for Netanyahu.
Well, Cyril, this is the 5th day that Netanyahu will testify, and proceedings actually began early because Netanyahu has to be at the Israeli parliament before 4 p.m. when they do close the sessions in the Knesset. But this morning, there was a letter that was released by the state attorney's office, and it comes after a couple of weeks ago, there were some judges at the Jerusalem District Court who expressed concern over the charges that were being pressed against Benjamin Netanyahu. However, the state attorney's office says that even if Netanyahu wasn't directly involved in these crimes, he did have awareness about it and he did know about it. So the state attorney's office and the prosecutors are arguing that Netanyahu did know about the situations behind the scenes, even though he denies any wrongdoing. Now, this is a trial that could take months, if not years, before we get a verdict. And even if Netanyahu is convicted, he could appeal that conviction and still be prime minister during that appeal.
Okay, how is he handling this politically? What's his reaction been so far?
Well, Netanyahu and members of his far-right coalition have said this is a smear campaign against the premier. He's repeatedly called the charges absurd, denying any wrongdoing since the beginning. But you have to remember, this isn't something that happened yesterday. This is 8 years in the making. And 5 years ago is actually when these charges were brought against Netanyahu in the indictment. But Netanyahu maintains his innocence. The first time that he did testify, he said that he's been waiting these 8 years to tell the truth. The prosecution and the state attorney's office say otherwise. They say that Netanyahu was involved in these crimes, which include bribery, which include corruption, which include accepting gifts. So Netanyahu says that he has to do his job as prime minister, maintaining a war on 7 different fronts, he says, but he says that he can do both. He can both stand trial and be the prime minister. And remember, there were a couple of times when he was testifying where they actually had to call a recess because he had to take some sort of security calls and make decisions as the premier. But surely an unprecedented moment in history for Israel's longest serving premier.
Samda Salahut reporting from Amman, Jordan. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.
Joining me now is one of the Palestinian-American plaintiffs in this new lawsuit against the Secretary of State, Ahmed Moore. He's a fellow at the Foundation for Middle East Peace. We're also joined by Sarah Lee Whitson, the executive director of Dawn, a human rights NGO supporting this lawsuit. It's great to have both of you with us. So Ahmed, tell us a little bit, first of all, before we get into the details of it, how's your family doing and what prompted this case? What prompted you to be involved in this case?
So it's a daily struggle for survival in Gaza, as you've reported, as others have reported, as I've reported. The fact of getting up every day and just securing clean water to drink, somewhere safe to sleep, food which is edible, is a struggle which defies the imagination. And that's been true for about 14 months now. When the genocide began, I and many other people in the country who were affected began to reach out to our congressional representatives to seek some kind of relief. And that was a dead end, frankly. This lawsuit is designed, hopefully, to get the people who are able to make decisions on these matters to comply with U.S. law. And that means practically ending military aid to Israeli units which are involved in human rights abuses. Practically 14 months into a genocide, I would be surprised if that didn't mean most of the Israeli units which are operating in Gaza.
Sarah, and I want to be clear here, this is not about the U.S. violating international. This is about the United States violating our own laws that are on our own books, so to speak, right? Including specifically the Leahy Law. Explain to us how and what the United States is doing is in violation of the Leahy Law.
Sure. The Leahy Law effectively requires the State Department to vet all Israeli security forces and to ascertain whether any of them have committed gross violations of human rights and to ensure that U.S. military assistance does not go to such units. The United States has never once identified a single Israeli unit as responsible for unremediated human rights violations. It has never blocked assistance to one single Israeli military unit since passage of the law in 1997, since even when the law was amended in 2019, specifically because the law had not been applied to Israel and a few other countries where the aid is supposedly untraceable. And even despite the amendment to the law, the State Department has never once identified a single Israeli unit as ineligible for U.S. assistance, despite the overwhelming evidence, including in the State Department's own annual human rights reports, of hundreds and thousands of cases of gross violations of human rights.
Tell us about the case that is being built right now with the evidence that you've been able to gather, because, you know, on the outside of it, you have these reports, these Amnesty International reports, the Human Rights Watch reports, Doctors Without Borders saying there's clear signs that ethnic cleansing is being committed. You've got ICC, ICJ, all of these things that the world is seeing and is being documented, in some cases really supported with evidence that has been gathered in the public domain, and yet somehow our own government, our own State Department, our own Department of Defense, which has much more robust capabilities of tracking this information, is somehow ambivalent. So whenever you ask the State Department about it, you get a response that's, well, we haven't come to any conclusions yet, we haven't made any determinations yet, and here we are 14 months into this, and still no clarity, no insight from the government. What do you have that would perhaps change their calculation?
Well, yeah, I mean, the assertion of the State Department that effectively.
Oops. All right, one chapter. Let's go. Ready? Contradiction is present in the process of development of all things. It permeates the process of development of each thing from beginning to end. This is the universality and absoluteness of contradiction, which we have discussed above. Now let us discuss the particularity and relativity of contradiction. Wow, that's a lot of words. Can y'all even read that? That just seems excessive. This problem should be studied on several levels. First, the contradiction in each form of motion of matter has its particularity. Strike that, not peculiarity, but particularity. So the contradiction in each form of motion of... Excuse me. Just threw up. The contradiction in each form of motion of matter has its particularity. Man's knowledge of matter is... Oh no. I lost my spot. Guys, I know how to read. Okay? I know how to read. I'm very well read. Get out of here, kitty boy. Get out. Go. Fucking asshole, man. Complete dickhead. You want to see an anarchist? Man's knowledge of matter is knowledge of its forms of motion. Because there is nothing in the world except matter in motion, and this motion must assume certain forms. In considering each form of motion of matter, we must observe the points which it has in common with other forms of motion. But what is especially important and necessary, if you're paying attention, constituting as it does the foundation of our knowledge of a thing, is to observe what is particular to this form of motion of matter. To observe the qualitative difference between this form of motion and other forms. Yeah. Only when we have done so can we distinguish between things. Every form of motion contains within itself its own particular contradiction. This particular contradiction constitutes the particular essence which distinguishes one thing from another, obviously. Only when we have done... Excuse me. It is the internal cause, okay? It is the internal cause, or, as it may be called, the basis for the immense variety of things in the world. Duh. There are many forms of motion in nature. Mechanical motion, sound, light, heat, electricity, dissociation, combination, and so on. All these forms are interdependent, but in its essence, each is different from the others. The particular essence of each form of motion is determined by its own particular contradiction. I'll say it again. Write this down. It will be on the exam. The particular essence of each form of motion is determined by its own particular contradiction. This holds true not only for nature, but also for social and ideological phenomena. Every form of society, every form of ideology has its own particular contradiction and particular essence. This is not live. This is not live. This is a rebroadcast from last Thursday. I don't know how many times I have to tell the chat. This is not a live stream. This is a replay. So quit asking if this is live, because it's not. Don't make me get upset, please. Every form of society, every form of ideology has its own particular contradiction and particular essence. The sciences are differentiated precisely on the basis of the particular contradictions inherent in their respective objects of study. Thus, the contradiction peculiar to a certain field of phenomena constitutes the object of study for a specific branch of science. For example, positive and negative numbers in mathematics, action and reaction in mechanics, positive and negative electricity and physics, dissociation and combination in chemistry, forces of production and relations of production, classes and class struggle in social science, offense and defense in military science. I will read in an English accent if I want to. Thank you very much. This is my live stream. Feck off, old chap. Idealism and militarism. Idealism and materialism. The metaphysical outlook and the dialectical outlook in philosophy. And so on and so forth. All these are the objects of study of different branches of science precisely because each branch has its own particular contradiction and particular essence. Of course, unless we understand the universality of contradiction, we have no way of discovering the universal cause or universal basis for the movement or development of things. However, unless we study the particularity of contradiction, we have no way of determining the particular essence of a thing which differentiates it from other things. No way of discovering the particular cause or particular basis for the movement or development of a thing, and no way of distinguishing one thing from another, or of demarcating the fields of science. Yes, that's right. As regards the sequence in the movement of man's knowledge, there is always a gradual growth from the knowledge of individual and particular things to the knowledge of things in general. Only after man knows the particular essence of many different things can he proceed to generalization and know the common essence of things. When man attains the knowledge of this common essence, he uses it as a guide and proceeds to study various concrete things which have not yet been studied or studied thoroughly, and to discover the particular essence of each. Only thus is he able to supplement, enrich, and develop his knowledge of their common essence and prevent such knowledge from withering or petrifying. These are the two processes of cognition. Are you paying attention? Because most of y'all motherfuckers out there are on the first stage of cognition. And that's why I don't fuck with y'all, chat, because y'all are like little frontal lobeless baby brain plebeites, okay? And that's a fact. Okay, well, I hope so. Because this shit is just, it's going by fast. And you better be catching all of it. Because I will not repeat myself. 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 Joe on YouTube, now let's be nice, okay? Do I need to take your toys away and make you go back to the kids' table? Or do you want to be with the grown-ups? We don't call other people names. Joey boy. Let's be respectful. We are in a public space. Nobody knows each other. We're just a bunch of strangers. Okay? There's no need to get personal, climb into your fifis like some Israeli chode boy, okay? We're not going to do that. So be nice. Okay, Joe, we're going to have to say goodbye to you. You didn't want to play nice? You're gone. Better luck next time, bozo. You hate to see it, folks, but sometimes people just don't belong and they need to vacate themselves, okay? Now, I lost my place. These are the two processes of cognition. One, from the particular to the general, and the other, from the general to the particular. Thus, cognition always moves in cycles, and, so long as scientific method is strictly adhered to, each cycle advances human knowledge a step higher, and so makes it more and more profound. When our dogmatists err on this question is that on the one hand, they do not understand that we have to study the particularity of contradiction and know the particular essence of individual things before we can adequately know the universality of contradiction and the common essence of things. and that on the other hand, they do not understand that after knowing the common essence of things, we must go further and study the concrete things that have not yet been thoroughly studied or have only just emerged. Our dogmatists are lazy bones. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They refuse to undertake any painstaking study of concrete things. They regard the general truths as emerging out of the void. They turn them into purely abstract, unfathomable formulas, and thereby completely deny and reverse the normal sequence by which man comes to know truth. Now, nor do they understand the interconnection of the two processes in cognition. From the particular to the general, and then from the general to the particular, they understand nothing of the Marxist theory of knowledge. It is necessary not only to study the particular contradiction and the essence determined thereby of a very great system of the forms of motion of matter, but also to study the particular contradiction and the essence of each process in the long course of development of each form of motion of matter. In every form of motion, each process of development, which is real, is qualitatively different. Our study must emphasize and start from this point. Qualitatively different contradictions can only be resolved by qualitatively different methods. For instance, the contradiction between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie is resolved by the method of socialist revolution. The contradiction between the great masses of the people and the feudal system is resolved by the method of democratic revolution. The contradiction between the colonies and imperialism is resolved by the method of national revolutionary war. The contradictions between the working class and the peasant class in socialist society is resolved by the method of collectivization and mechanization in agriculture. Contradictions within the Communist Party is resolved by the method of criticism and self-criticism. The contradiction between society and nature is resolved by the method of developing the productive forces. Processes change. Old processes and old contradictions disappear. New processes and new contradictions emerge. And the methods of resolving contradictions differ accordingly. In Russia, there was a fundamental difference between the contradiction resolved by the February Revolution and the contradiction resolved by the October Revolution, as well as between the methods used to resolve them. The principle of using different methods to resolve different contradictions is one which Marxist-Leninists must strictly observe. The dogmatists do not observe this principle. They do not understand that conditions differ in different kinds of revolution, and so do not understand that different methods should be used to resolve different contradictions. On the contrary, they invariably adopt what they imagine to be an unalterable formula and arbitrarily apply it everywhere, which only causes setbacks to the revolution or makes a sorry mess of what was originally well done. In order to reveal the particularity of the contradictions in any process in the development of a thing, in their totality or interconnections, that is, in order to reveal the essence of the process, it is necessary to reveal the particularity of the two aspects of each of the contradictions in that process. Otherwise, it will be impossible to discover the essence of the process. This likewise requires the utmost attention in our study. There are many contradictions in the course of development of any major thing. For instance, in the course of China's bourgeois democratic revolution, where the conditions are exceedingly complex, there exists the contradiction between all the oppressed classes in Chinese society and imperialism. the contradiction between the great masses of the people and feudalism, the contradiction between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the contradiction between the peasantry and the urban petty bourgeoisie on the one hand, and the bourgeoisie on the other. The contradiction between the various reactionary ruling groups, and so on. These contradictions cannot be treated in the same way since each has its own particularity. Moreover, the two aspects of each contradiction cannot be treated in the same way since each aspect has its own characteristics. We who are engaged in the Chinese Revolution should not only understand the particularity of these contradictions in their totality, that is, in their interconnections, but should also study the two aspects of each contradiction as the only means of understanding the totality. When we speak of understanding each aspect of a contradiction, we mean understanding what specific position each aspect occupies, what concrete forms it assumes, and its interdependence, and in its contradiction with its opposite, and what concrete methods are employed in the struggle with its opposite when the two are both interdependent and in contradiction, and also after the interdependence breaks down. It is of great importance to study these problems. Lenin meant just this when he said that the most essential thing in Marxism, the living soul of Marxism, is the concrete analysis of concrete conditions. Our dogmatists have violated Lenin's teachings. They never use their brains to analyze anything concretely, and in their writings and speeches they always use stereotypes devoid of content, thereby creating a very bad style of work in our party. In studying a problem, we must shun subjectivity, one-sidedness, and superficiality. To be subjective means not to look at the problems objectively, that is, not to use the materialist viewpoint in looking at problems. I have discussed this in my essay on practice. To be one-sided means to not look at problems all-sidedly. For example, to understand only China but not Japan, only the Communist Party but not the Kuomintang, only the proletariat but not the bourgeoisie, only the peasants but not the landlords, only the favorable conditions but not the difficult ones, only the past but not the future, only individual parts but not the whole, only the defects but not the achievements, only the plaintiff's case but not the defendant's, only underground revolutionary work but not open revolutionary work, and so on. In a word, it means not to understand the characteristics of both aspects of a contradiction. This is what we mean by looking at a problem one-sidedly, or it may be called seeing the part but not the whole, seeing the trees but not the forest. That way, it is impossible to Therefore, that way, it is impossible to find the method for resolving a contradiction. It is impossible to accomplish the tasks of the revolution, to carry out assignments well, or to develop inter-party ideological struggle correctly. When Sun Wu-Zu said in discussing military science, "Know the enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles with no danger of defeat," he was referring to the two sides in a battle. Wei Chang'e, or of the Tang dynasty, blah, 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 also understood the error of one-sidedness when he said, "Listen to both sides and you will be enlightened. Heed only one side and you will be benighted." But our comrades often look at problems one-sidedly, and so they often run into snags. In the novel Xu Hu Xuan, Sung Chang thrice attacked Chu village. Twice he was defeated because he was ignorant of the local conditions and used the wrong method. Later, he changed his method. First, he investigated the situation, and he familiarized himself with the maze of roads. Then he broke up the alliance between the Li, Hu, and Chu villages and sent his men in disguise into the enemy camp to lie in wait, using a stratagem similar to that of the Trojan horse in the foreign story. And on the third occasion, he won. There are many examples of materialist dialectics in Shu, Hu, Shan, of which the episode of the 3 attacks on Chu village is one of the best. Lenin said, "In order to really know an object, we must embrace, study all its sides, all connections, and mediations. We shall never achieve this completely, but the demand for all-sidedness is a safeguard against mistakes and rigidity." We should remember his words. To be superficial means to consider neither the characteristics of a contradiction in its totality nor the characteristics of each of its aspects. It means to deny the necessity for probing deeply into a thing and into your mom, and minutely studying the characteristics of its contradiction, but instead merely to look from afar, after glimpsing the rough outline, immediately to try to resolve the contradiction, to answer a question, settle a dispute, handle work, or direct a military operation. This way of doing things is bound to lead to trouble. The reason the dogmatist and empiricist comrades in China have made mistakes lies precisely in their subjectivist, one-sided and superficial way of looking at things. To be one-sided and superficial is at the same time to be subjective. For all objective things are actually interconnected and are governed by inner laws. But instead of undertaking the task of reflecting things as they really are, some people only look at things one-sidedly or superficially, and who know neither their interconnections nor their inner laws, and so their method is subjectivist. Not only does the whole process of the movement of opposites in the development of a thing, both in their interconnections and in each of the aspects, have particular features to which we must give attention. But each stage in the process has its particular features to which we must give attention too. The fundamental contradiction in the process of a development of a thing and the essence of the process determined by this fundamental contradiction will not disappear until the process is completed. But in a lengthy process, the conditions usually differ at each stage. The reason is that although the nature of the fundamental contradiction in the process of the development of a thing and the essence of the process remain unchanged, the fundamental contradiction becomes more and more intensified as it passes from one stage into another in the lengthy process. In addition, among the numerous major and minor contradictions which are determined or influenced by the fundamental contradiction, some become intensified, some are temporarily or partially resolved or mitigated, and some new ones emerge. Hence, the process is marked by stages. If people do not pay attention to the stages in the process of development of a thing, they cannot deal with its contradictions properly. For instance, when the capitalism of the era of free competition developed into imperialism, there was no change in the class nature of the two classes in fundamental contradiction, namely the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, or in the capitalist essence of society. However, the contradiction between these two classes became intensified. The contradiction between monopoly and non-monopoly capital emerged. The contradiction between the colonial powers and the colonies became intensified. The contradiction among the capitalist countries resulting from their uneven development manifested itself with particular sharpness, and thus there arose the special stage of capitalism, the stage of imperialism. Leninism is the Marxism of the era of imperialism and proletarian revolution precisely because Lenin and Stalin have correctly explained these contradictions and correctly formulated the theory and tactics of the proletarian revolution for their resolution. take the process of China's bourgeois democratic revolution, which began with the revolution of 1911. It too has several distinct stages. In particular, the revolution in its period of bourgeois leadership and the revolution in its period of proletarian leadership represent two vastly different historical stages. In other words, proletarian leadership has fundamentally changed the whole face of the revolution, has brought about a new alignment of classes, given rise to a tremendous upsurge in the present revolution, imparted thoroughness to the revolution against imperialism and feudalism, created the possibility of the transition from the democratic revolution to the socialist revolution, and so on. None of these was possible in the period when the revolution was under bourgeois leadership. Although no change has taken place in the nature of the fundamental contradiction in the process as a whole, i.e. in the anti-imperialist, anti-feudal, democratic revolutionary nature of the process, the opposite of which is its semi-colonial and semi-feudal nature, nonetheless, this process has passed through several stages of development in the course of more than 20 years. During this time, many great events have taken place: the failure of the Revolution of 1911, and the establishment of the regime of the Northern warlords, the formation of the First National United Front and the Revolution of 1924, the breakup of the United Front and the desertion of the bourgeoisie to the side of the counter-revolution, the wars among the new warlords, the Agrarian Revolutionary War, the establishment of the Second National United Front, and the War of Resistance against Japan. These stages are marked by particular features, such as the intensification of certain contradictions, the partial or temporary resolution of other contradictions, and the emergence of yet other contradictions. In studying the particularities of the contradictions at each stage in the process of development of a thing, we must not only observe them in their interconnections or their totality, we must also examine the two aspects of each contradiction. For instance, consider the Kuomintang and the Communist Party. Okay, I'm considering them. Take one aspect, the Kuomintang. In the period of the First United Front, the Kuomintang carried out Sun Yat-sen's three great policies of alliance with Russia, cooperation with the Communist Party, and assistance to the peasants and workers. Hence, it was revolutionary and vigorous. It was an alliance of various classes for the democratic revolution. After 1927, however, the Kuomintang changed into its opposite and became a reactionary bloc of the landlords and the big bourgeoisie. After the Xi'an incident in December of 1936, it began another change in the direction of ending the Civil War and cooperating with the Communist Party for joint opposition to Japanese imperialism. Such have been the particular features of the Kuomintang in the three stages. Of course, these features have arisen from a variety of causes. Now take the other aspect, the Chinese Communist Party. In the period of the First United Front, the Chinese Communist Party was in its infancy. It courageously led the revolution of 24 to 27, but revealed its immaturity in its understanding of the character, the tasks, the methods of the revolution, and consequently it became possible for Shen Tuism, which appeared during the latter part of this revolution, to assert itself and bring about the defeat of the revolution. After 1927, the Communist Party courageously led the Agrarian Revolutionary War and created the Revolutionary Army and revolutionary base areas. However, it committed adventurous errors which brought about very great losses both to the army and to the base areas. Since 1935, the party has corrected these errors and has been leading the new United Front for resistance to Japan. This great struggle is now developing. At the present stage, the Communist Party is a party that has gone through the test of 2 revolutions and acquired a wealth of experience. Such have been the particular features of the Chinese Communist Party in the 3 stages. These features, too, have arisen from a variety of causes. Without studying both these sets of features, we cannot understand the particular features of the 2 parties in the examination of the class basis of the 2 parties and the resultant contradictions which have been arisen between each party and other forces at different periods. Duh! For instance, in the period of its first cooperation with the Communist Party, yeah, duh! Yeah, okay, bye. The Kuomintang stood in contradiction to foreign imperialism and was therefore anti-imperialist. On the other hand, it stood in contradiction to the great masses of the people within the country. Although in words it promised many benefits to the working people, in fact it gave them little or nothing, thank you. No, seriously, thank you. In the period when it carried on the anti-communist war, the Kuomintang collaborated with imperialism and feudalism against the great masses of the people and wiped out all the gains they had won in the revolution and thereby intensified its contradictions with them. In the present period of the anti-Japanese war, the Kuomintang stands in contradiction to Japanese imperialism and wants cooperation with the Communist Party without ever relaxing its struggle against the Communist Party and the people or its oppression of them. So what Mao is basically saying is that the principal contradiction is changed in the process of the development between, these two parties, the Kuomintang and the Communist Party. Like, they've had to ally themselves temporarily to fight off of Japanese imperialism, but they're still like antagonistic towards each other. It's just something else has superseded it. As for the Communist Party, it has always, in every period, stood with the great masses of the people against imperialism and feudalism, but in the present period of the anti-Japanese war, it has adopted a moderate policy towards the Kuomintang and the domestic feudal forces because the Kuomintang has pressed itself in favor of resisting Japan. The above circumstances have resulted now in alliance between the two parties and now in struggle between them. And even during the periods of alliance, there has been a complicated state of simultaneous alliance and struggle. If we do not study the particular features of both aspects of the contradiction, we shall fail to understand not only the relations of each party with the other forces, but also the relations between the two parties. I'm tracking. It can thus be seen that in studying the particularity of any kind of contradiction, the contradiction in each form of motion of matter, the contradiction in each of its processes of development, the two aspects of the contradiction in each process, the contradiction at each stage of a process, and the two aspects of the contradiction at each stage. In studying the particularity of all these contradictions, we must not be subjective and arbitrary, but must analyze it concretely. Without concrete analysis, there can be no knowledge of the particularity of any contradiction. We must always remember Lenin's words, the concrete analysis of concrete conditions. Marx and Engels were the first to provide us with excellent models of such concrete analysis, okay? When Marx and Engels applied the law of contradiction and thanks to the study of the socio-historical process, they discovered the contradiction between the productive forces and the relations of the production. They discovered the contradiction between the exploiting and exploited classes, and also the resultant contradiction between the economic base and its superstructure. Politics, ideology. And they discovered how these contradictions inevitably lead to different kinds of social revolution and different kinds of class society. Because the range of things is vast and there is no limit to their development, what is universal in one context becomes particular in another. Conversely, what is particular in one context becomes universal in another. The contradiction in the capitalist system between the social character of production and the private ownership of the means of production is common to all countries where capitalism exists and develops. As far as capitalism is concerned, this constitutes the universality of contradiction. What are you lost on, World War III initiator? Don't cry. You know, it's a lot of big words, it's wordy, but it's simple. Okay? If you have a question, just make sure you raise your hand first and I'll call on you. But, if you're lost, please, let's get found, Hindsight is 20/20 and the time is 4/20. So, smoke them if you got them. Life is shit, you know? Okay, you need simplified thingies. Yeah. Well, we're just, you know, I think the thing, what's the main word that you keep hearing over and over again? Excuse me. Contradiction. You know, this is Mao's On Contradiction. This is his writing quote on contradiction. So he's talking about contradictions. And he starts with the two world outlooks. He starts with the idealist outlook, which was formulated by, I guess most notably by Hegel. That was his contribution. And then there was Marx's contribution, which was the materialist dialectic, which took all the best parts of Hegel, but it obviously evolved it, you know, into a more concrete. I'm trying really hard not to say material because that's what it's called, materialist, but I think it was sort of correctly identifying that matter gives rise to ideas. So it's material that is the base and the ideas are the superstructure. But, you know, in order to understand like history and really anything, you have to understand that contradictions are what drives the natural world. Every object has contradictions within it, and that's what gives it its identity. So the fact that, you know, I'm trying to think of a good example, but you know, everything has its opposite basically, and you can think of a lot of examples. You know, opposite of light is dark. That's a low-hanging fruit right there. You know, the opposite of fire, water. You can think of all. You know, he talks about electricity. There's a positive and negative charge. What are the other ones that he listed? There was a bunch more. And like when you recognize that, you know, you want to take an objectivist, materialist view of everything, you know, like whether it's physics, it's you know, law, or if it's in this case social science. So, you know, what are the contradictions in society? What is the contradiction in a capitalist society? What's the contradictions prevalent in a country like North Korea? You know, there's contradictions. There's principal contradictions, and there's secondary contradictions. So, you know, he's just kind of sort of taken us through the fact that there is the two world outlook, materialist, idealist. Obviously, we are materialist. Then he says, okay, then we have to understand that contradictions are, you know, when we're trying to grasp our reality, we have to understand that there's contradiction is what drives the process of development in everything. So it's prevalent from beginning to end in the course of the development of a thing. And there's obviously, looking at a contradiction, any contradiction, there's two ways you can think of it. There's the universality of contradiction, and there's the particularity of contradiction. And it's only by studying the particular can you understand the universal. You look at many different objects or examples, and you can form, you know, by studying those particular internal contradictions within an object, you can thus begin to understand the essence of all things. And so that's all really he's talking about at this point. And he does make a very big distinction that an idealist will say that external causes drive objects, but the materialist says that internal causes force the development, and the external world has an effect on it, which drives the change. But that change is internal into it. And it's based on the contradictions internal to that object. For example, there's, at a certain temperature, an egg will produce a chicken, but there is no temperature at which an egg will produce a stone. And that's because the egg is meant to become the chicken. It cannot be, it has its own particular contradiction, has its own particular essence. And that would be, that would speak to the fact that the development of a thing is, is dependent on its internal contradictions. And it's not external. But yes, the external, obviously the external world has an effect on it, because the external world at a certain temperature, the water becomes a steam. But, the water can't become a fig tree or whatever, It can only become a certain thing, and that has to do with its own internal makeup. Anyway. That's about as best as I can describe it to you right now. But I was, to be fair, I know I was a little clumsy in my synopsis, but I wasn't given much to work with. Okay, they just said I need simplified thingies, and so that's what I was working with. I was just trying to simplify it. So the three things that we've gone over, this is the three parts: the two-world outlook, the universality of contradiction, and the particularity of contradiction. And just suffice it to say that there's contradictions upon contradictions upon contradictions, and they change over time. And I think all Mao is trying to say is it really takes extensive study to understand what methods to employ, in our case, to overcome the bourgeoisie or overthrow capitalism or produce some sort of transcendental change over society. And this falls in line with another point, which is, I think, a sort of a principle of Marxist dialectics, is the fact that many imperceptible quantitative changes gives rise to qualitative changes. And a dogmatist, according to Mao, would only think of the quantitative changes, like to vulgar evolutionists, what he calls, or to Hegelian idealists, there's only quantitative changes, plus or minus repetition, but there's no qualitative there's no qualitative changes. And he's saying that that's immaterial, that's wrong, that's it's not true. There's also qualitative changes. And we can go back to nature to find an example of this, because let's go back to temperature and water. Let's just say water's at 70 degrees. Well, if that degree, if it drops from 70 to 69 degrees, if the water itself changes temperature from 70 degrees to 69 degrees, you won't be able to really perceive that. 69 to 68 to 67 to, the water will still look the same, but at a certain temperature, the entire, physical makeup of the water will completely change. It'll become a solid, or conversely, if it's the other way around, it'll become a gas, a steam. So, literally touch grass, something Hegel never did. Experience the world from behind walls. You call them Hegel goblins. I don't understand how people, there's literally people in the 21st century that are like, no, man, Hegel. It's Hegel that we don't listen to Marx. They reject Marx weirdly, but they all gung ho about Hegel. they're like, I imagine that they're like popping their collar, like they're a T-bird or something. They're just trying to be contrarian. Okay, let me finish this last paragraph. Because the range of things is vast. Wait, let's see, where were we? Marx and Engels applied the law of contradiction in things to the study of the socio-historical process. So, when they applied the law of contradiction in things to the study of the socio-historical process, they discovered the contradiction between the productive forces and the relations of production. They discovered the contradiction between the exploiting and the exploited classes, and also the resultant contradiction between the economic base and its superstructure. That's why it's always good, I think, when to have in your answers and in your rhetoric, and it's very, you know, it rings true to people, whether they like know it or not, they learn from you, is when you can contain the contradictions in your rhetoric. When you start speaking about the contradictions, when you contain the opposites in your answer. So exploiting, exploited, the productive forces, the relations of the production. These are all contradictions in the study of the socio-historical process, which Marx and Engels applied the law of contradiction to. And also the resultant contradiction between the economic base and its superstructure. Yeah. And they discovered how these contradictions inevitably lead to different kinds of social revolution in different kinds of class society. And this, you know, this is sort of fresh in my mind, but I love when people try to, enlighten centrist, when they try to behave like an enlightened centrist and say, well, you know, you guys are extreme for saying it's either capitalism or it's socialism. But if you understand how, like, what Mao is trying to teach us, you would understand that that's the only antithesis of capitalism is socialism. And we live in a certain kind of a class society where the only opposite, you know, the only way that society can organize itself that would be the antithesis of capitalism is socialism. You have two classes, you know, and there's no secret third thing. It's like the egg and the chicken and the stone. It's like capitalism will never, you know, the opposite of capitalism will never be anything else besides socialism. That's just, you know, that's taking the materialist dialectic approach. There, you know, there's nothing that's, the opposite of capitalism is like, can only be one thing. Just like the opposite of light is dark, you know? You can't rival capitalism with anything other than socialism. Because you have to understand what capitalism is in the first place. Once you define it, then you can find out what its opposite is. And we know that capitalism is a system of private ownership of the means of production. I'm sorry, are you being sarcastic? Not my real name? So you're clever because you put your name as not my real name, and you're also sarcastic and sardonic, aren't you? You little bitch. How dare you? How dare you double down on your arrogance, you conceited little prick? Why, I oughta. And I will. At some point. I'm going to give you a piece of my mind. I tell you. Yes, World War III. See, you're getting it. Capitalism equals slavery. Very good. Because the range of things is vast and there is no, it doesn't matter if you're being sincere or not. It's how I perceive you to be. That's all that matters. Okay? And right now, I perceive that you are insulting me by being a passive-aggressive little turd burglar. And I won't stand for that. This contradiction manifests itself in the contradiction between the organized character of production in individual enterprises and the anarchic character of production in society as a whole. In terms of class relations, it manifests itself in the contradiction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Because the range of things is vast and there is no limit to their development, what is universal in one context becomes particular in another. Conversely, what is particular in one context becomes universal in another. The contradiction in the capitalist system between the social character of production and the private ownership of the means of production is common to all countries where capitalism exists and develops. As far as capitalism is concerned, this constitutes the universality of contradiction. But this contradiction of capitalism belongs only to a certain historical stage in the general development of class society. As far as the contradiction between the productive forces and the relations of production in class society as a whole is concerned, it constitutes the particularity of contradiction. However, in the course of dissecting the particularity of all these contradictions in capitalist society, Marx gave a still more profound, more adequate, and more complete elucidation of the universality of the contradiction between the productive forces and the relations of production in class society in general. Since the particular is united with the universal, and since the universality as well as the particularity of contradiction is inherent in everything, universality residing in particularity, we should, when studying an object, try to discover both the particular and the universal and their interconnection, to discover both particularity and universality, and also their interconnection within the object itself, and to discover the interconnections of this object with the many objects outside of it. When Stalin explained the historical roots of Leninism in his famous work, The Foundations of Leninism, he analyzed the international situation in which Leninism arose, analyzed those contradictions of capitalism which reached their culmination under imperialism, and showed how these contradictions made proletarian revolution, a matter for immediate action and created favorable conditions for direct onslaught on capitalism. What is more, he analyzed the reasons why Russia became the cradle of Leninism, why Tsarist Russia became the focus of all the contradictions of imperialism, and why it was possible for the Russian proletariat to become the vanguard of the international revolutionary proletariat. Thus, Stalin analyzed the universality of contradiction in imperialism, showing why Leninism is the Marxism of the era of imperialism and proletarian revolution, and at the same time analyzed the particularity of Tsarist Russian imperialism within this general contradiction, showing why Russia became the birthplace of the theory and tactics of proletarian revolution, and how the universality of contradiction is contained in this particularity. Stalin's analysis provides us with a model for understanding the particularity and the universality of contradiction and their interconnection. On the question of using dialectics in the study of objective phenomena, Marx and Engels, and likewise Lenin and Stalin, always enjoined people not to be in any way subjective and arbitrary, but from the concrete conditions and the actual objective movement of these phenomena, to discover their concrete contradictions, the concrete position of each aspect of every contradiction, and the concrete interrelations of the contradictions. Our dogmatists do not have this attitude in study and therefore can never get anything right. We must take warning from their failure and learn to acquire this attitude, which is the only correct one in study. The relationship between the universality and the particularity of contradiction is the relationship between the general character and the individual character of contradiction. By the former, we mean that contradiction exists in and runs through all processes from beginning to end. Motion, things, processes, thinking, all are contradictions. To deny contradiction is to deny everything. This is a universal truth for all times and all countries, which admits of no exception, hence the general character, the absoluteness of contradiction. But this general character is contained in every individual character. Without individual character, there can be no general character. If all individual character were removed, what general character would remain? It is because each contradiction is particular that individual character arises. All individual character exists conditionally and temporarily and hence is relative. This truth concerning general and individual character, concerning absoluteness and relativity, is the quintessence of the problem of contradiction in things. Failure to understand it is tantamount to abandoning dialectics. So in the individual is how we find what is the general. All right, that was a third chapter. That was tonight's reading from the Gospel of Mao. And guess what? Nobody gifted me any subs tonight, so I'm signing off, okay? I'm off the clock. I ain't here to be fucking around with y'all and shit. Alright? So, fuck you. I'm calling your mother. I'm letting her know that her son is a failure. And I'm just, you know, gonna make your mom cry now. For the offense, okay? Send the money, or the Rathbone gets it. There we go. That's right. All right. For real though. I am cruel, but I'm not cruel, okay? I'm stern, but I am fair. All right? I'm stern, but I am fair. All right. On the serious note, good night and good luck, and I'll see you guys next time, okay?